Chapter 111, Building the Hall. Chapter text Chapter LXXXI, Building the Hall. After Taija's beatdown of Tame, the day went by quickly. In no time at all it was evening, and she was drinking tea with Benny in her small room. The hall was expanding incredibly fast, but it was coming from nothing, and so there was no space for luxuries. For now anyway. So when are you planning to head for Siwin's village? I assume Cadswain's told you where it is. I expect they'll be glad to see you and all of those novices and accepted. Actually, I had been thinking. I might stay here for a while. If you do not mind, of course. Stay. Why? Not that I wouldn't welcome that. Obviously, you're welcome to stay as long as you want, but I thought you'd want to be back among the tower, Aes Sedai. Yes, well, Siwin has her ways, but between you and me, I cannot say I particularly like the woman, and she has made rather a mess of her time as Amulin. You, on the other hand, are doing something interesting, and frankly, Taija dear, I think you need someone to keep an eye on you before you do something else foolish. What were you thinking, fighting Tame like that, without your Angreal? I knew I could beat him. You saw, I didn't even break a sweat. Taija tried not to sound petulant. That is not the point. Anyway, I can see the burdens on you, so maybe I can help in my own way while giving my girls somewhere safe to learn. So you'd keep the girls here? Taija blinked a few times. Well, they'd be welcome too, but if they're training at the hall then, they need to follow the hall's rules. Is that a problem? Not at all, as long as they can return to the White Tower when it is deemed necessary. Taija nearly agreed, and then hesitated. Just because she liked Benny didn't mean that the way things worked at the hall should change. Welcome to leave at any time if it's their choice, but once they have started in the hall, if they wish to stay then they may stay, and they will be protected from any retaliation by the tower, Aes Sedai. Benny's look sharpened, and Taija met her eyes without blinking. Then she smiled and relaxed. Of course, Nynaeve and the other girls. Well, I cannot speak for other Aes Sedai, but that is acceptable to me. Taija nodded, relieved. She didn't particularly care what the other tower Aes Sedai thought about it. I'm perfectly happy for people to train at both the tower and the hall light. I see no reason why someone could not be raised to be Aes Sedai in both organizations separately, or a dedicated wise one. The hall isn't like the White Tower. It's about philosophy and attitude, not controlling people. No offense. Benny gave Taija a long look. You know, you are a very dangerous woman. What's that meant to mean? She smiled. Just that you are full of surprises. Now what could I offer to your hall to earn my keep? History. We actually have a history tutor, a scholar from Keemlin, perhaps politics and etiquette. Yes, that could work. Benny leant back in her chair with a smile. Now tell me about Teljanin. He seems a very useful and competent fellow. Life running the hall was endlessly busy. Taija had to teach classes, of course, but she was also doing far too much management and administration, as well as dealing with the initiates. At least since their fight, Tame had been keeping his head down and behaving. A few days after Benny's arrival, Ken was leading one of Initiate's basic self-defense classes. The man was a surprisingly good hire, although he wasn't actually being paid as such. Not by Taija anyway, he just insisted it was his honor. Amy's had sent him her way a couple of weeks ago, and ever since, the aging dedicated warrior had been teaching non-channeling combat, both at a personal level and also classes on modern tactics. Much as Taija didn't like it, the last battle was coming, and so the curriculum had to be more martial than it otherwise might have been. She watched the tall, gray-haired man leading the men and women through some kind of fighting form. No doubt he'd soon have them facing off against each other. The women looked a bit ridiculous doing it in their dresses, but that was their choice. A couple of the girls had actually started emulating the way Taija dressed, but none in this group. There had been some protests when she'd said that everyone, male or female, would need to do basic self-defense classes, covering how to fight with a knife and how to fight unarmed. While it had been Tell's suggestion to run the advanced fighting classes for swords and more advanced unarmed combat, compulsory basic training was Taija's. She was certainly no fighter, not in that sense, but just having some basic knowledge gave far more options and made people much safer. The more advanced classes, to be honest, Taija suspected they were just Tell having fun, but his arguments had been good enough that she'd let it go. After their forms, the group of initiates moved on to some light sparring, trying to wrestle each other to the ground. Ken moved between them, shouting corrections and advice. Taija was a little surprised at how good a teacher he was actually. She'd been a bit nervous that a dedicated warrior would be too harsh on soft wetlanders, but he seemed to have excellent judgment for how far he could push people. Not that that stopped every temper tantrum. One of the white tower accepted was thrown, tumbling to the ground with a thump. Ken hurried up to her as she lay there staring frustratedly at the sky. He offered her a hand up which she refused, angrily hauling herself to her feet. "Helena, you must try to curve your body to absorb the impact, like I have shown you." She rounded on him, fury on her face, and then thought better of saying anything and turned away, stalking off. Ken looked like he was about to say something and then caught Taija's eye as she moved to intercept her. "Helena," Taija raised her voice slightly. "Stop a second, let's talk. Why are you storming off like this?" She stopped, but she was clearly still livid. "I don't see why I have to do this. It's undignified. It's got nothing to do with channeling or being an Aes Sedai. It's just rolling around like barbarian men. Rude. Many of Benny's novices and accepted were struggling to adapt. Especially the accepted. They'd had the benefit of years of practice channeling, so Taija's own initiates were behind them, even if they were catching up fast, and it was fueling their superiority complex. You're learning because it's important that you're able to defend yourself. Taija kept her voice mild. No one is making you learn to fight like a warrior. Those classes are optional, but channeling won't always be there to protect you. What if you're shielded, or blinded, or caught by surprise? All these classes are stupid, Helena muttered, but not quietly enough. Would you say that to Benny, said I. Taija allowed some sharpness to bleed into her tone, or anyone else at the White Tower. Well, they're real eyes, said I. Taija suppressed a flash of anger, but her voice became colder. I'm not forcing you to be here. You're welcome to leave whenever you want. Although Benny said I might have something to say about it. Until then, you will learn what you're taught. I'll see you at sunrise tomorrow morning for your lack of respect. You can't. I do believe I can. As I said, if you don't like it, you're free to leave. You have enough control that you're not a danger to anyone else. Perhaps moving water from one barrel to another using a cup for the day. That would be suitably pointless. Helena seemed to be one of the slower learners, although she at least wasn't stupid enough to try to appeal to Benny. The last girl who did that had had her punishment doubled by Benny, and Taija had received a lecture afterwards on how she'd been too soft. A couple of weeks later, Tell grabbed Taija at the end of the day. Taija, he gave her a small, polite bow, appropriate for a respected senior colleague. I'm sorry to bother you, but there was something I wanted to discuss with you. Taija sighed. Again and again, they were pushed together by the need to run the hall. She couldn't do it without him, but every time they spoke it was another nail driven into her. Sure, Tell, what's up? Is there a reason you're holding the girls and Alexei back? What do you mean? Taija tried not to snap at him, suppressing the flash of irritation that bubbled up inside her. He gave her a look, the one he always used when she was being deliberately obtuse. After a moment she cracked. I'm not holding them back. They're just so young, so new to channeling. We're rebuilding this. We can't start lowering standards. It needs to be different to the half-drained women in the tower. Tell sighed and nearly reached out to squeeze her shoulder, stopping himself as Taija took a step back out of reach. You don't think they're good enough? She wasn't sure why she was thinking like that, and his sympathetic look was annoying her. There were too many other things to worry about. Look, let's talk this through. If you're not convinced by the end of it, just tell me to piss off. Fine, Taija huffed and crossed her arms. Annoyingly, Tell just smiled. He shouldn't be smiling at her like that. It was too affectionate, and she wasn't in the mood anyway. Okay, first, channeling. I think it's undeniable they meet the standard. Alexei's the worst of them just because he's been channeling the least time, but their skill is better than plenty of Aes Sedai from our time. They've had good teachers. He should have tried to look less smug, but he was right. True, but we need to be better. I don't want to recreate the average Aes Sedai from our time, not now. Tell gave Taija another of his looks. Taija, they're well beyond the average. All three of them are strong. More importantly, they're talented, and they've worked extremely hard. They could do the test with their eyes shoot tea. Taija wanted to argue. She needed high standards, but he was right. Okay, fine. She really should try to be more graceful about it. He hadn't actually done anything wrong other than being right. Good, now what have they done that's worthy of the title? Plenty of people got it for basically volunteering an evening a week for charity. They've fought and risked their lives for the light repeatedly. Alexei gave up his whole life to follow and protect you. He just wanted an adventure. No, that was a churlish thought that she was only having because Tell was annoying her. That's true, Taija grudgingly allowed. Attitudes and goals. Tell ticked off the final point. They've basically devoted themselves to you and this project and fighting for the light. They're all good kids. What more can you ask for? That they're not kids. Taija couldn't help but snap. I know Alexei's older, but what about the girls? I can't just do that, throw teenagers into this, leave them to live or die by themselves. I'm not going to produce child soldiers. Tell grimaced. I know, but they're involved regardless. They've been fighting practically since you met them. They've risked their lives for you and for the light. I don't like it any more than you do, but they've earned the right to be treated as adults, to be rewarded as adults. Taija wanted to argue. She wanted him to leave her alone so that she could go back to her room and sulk. But he was right, damn him. Before she could reply, he kept going. You've done something special with those girls. They've had to grow up fast, but you've made sure they've turned into the kind of people who'll change the world. I'd be proud to call them Aes Sedai. Suddenly, Taija's anger faded. She was just tired, with too many competing things pulling on her at once. Why did he have to do what he did back before everything? If he hadn't, she could just tell him that she was just so tired and lonely and wanted someone to look after her. Okay, Tell, you're right. I don't like it, but you're right. We'll raise them. I suppose we could do with more full eyes, said I anyway. Maybe we can palm off more of the teaching on them too. Taija gave a weak chuckle. Did she just make a joke to him? For fuck's sake, she must be tired. Equals equals equals. Wear the badge of the Aes Sedai with pride, for all who meet you shall know that stand a representative of the Hall of Servants, but remember to be Aes Sedai is to serve. With those words, Taija embraced Alexei with a tight hug. Welcome, brother. When she released him, he quickly embraced the girls too, all of them congratulating each other. It was lovely, touching. Tell was right, damn him, she had been holding them back. Equals 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 Eben was practically bouncing as he bonded bricks in place with the power under the watchful eye of Tell Sedai. Benny Sedai was beside him supervising the women. Another man promoted to Aes Sedai. It was like the Age of Legends all over again. Also Alexei, no Alexei Sedai now, was just so nice. When he'd been having problems working out how to spin air for an exercise, Alexei had sat down and talked him through it, in so much detail too, until he really understood. Alexei hadn't had to do that, but he did. He always had a nice word for everyone, men and women, and his smile brightened every room. It did mean that there were no more aspirants in the hall, though. Just initiates and Aes Sedai. For now. He would be Aes Sedai. He'd work and work until he got there and could wear that badge just like Alexei and Tell and the Lord Dragon. The first step would be to get the plain red badge of an aspirant, though. He spun earth and fire together to bond a few bricks to the others. It was a bit of a strain, even with the small bricks, but he was making himself useful, and that was what mattered. Also, Taija Sedai had told them that the power was like a muscle. The more you exercised it, the stronger you got, as long as you didn't overstrain it. He shot a smile at Helena as she lifted bricks onto the wall. The way that her brown curls framed her face really did make her quite pretty, not that he'd ever admit that to her. She'd probably bite his head off and call him a wool-headed boy or something. At least she'd become more willing to deign to speak to him over the last few weeks. Isn't it amazing? 3 new eyes, said I. He knew she wouldn't be as enthusiastic as him, but he just needed to talk to someone about it. Helena sniffed. I suppose it is nice for them. She seemed less than enthusiastic about the bricks she was lifting, probably thought it was below her or something. He knew she'd been punished more than once when she'd first joined in with the initiates of the hall. Apparently discipline in the tower was much harsher than in the hall, but directly disrespecting, and I said I wasn't tolerated here either, particularly not by Taija Sedai. She could be quite scary when she was angry. Carrying water from one barrel to another in a small cup for a day certainly hadn't improved her mood. Neither had digging holes and then filling them in again, although she was certainly more careful about what she said now. The problem was, he wasn't sure she really understood the difference between what she was doing now and the punishment. Tell said I had explained it all in detail, of course. Now they were doing useful work, Joining together channelers and non-channelers to build the hall, it was honorable and respectable. Just the kind of thing I said I should be doing. On the other hand, if they were punished, they were assigned useless work that benefited no one. A waste of their time and shamefully pointless for an Aes Sedai or someone who wanted to be one. Still, he wasn't going to let her get him down. Oh, come on, the third male Aes Sedai in 3,000 years. It's amazing, and Egwene and Elaine Sedai are incredible too. They're so young, even younger than me, he lied, but they're so skilled. I've seen them practicing with the other Aes Sedai. Even if I can't see their webs, I can see the effect. They're called weaves. She huffed, but then softened a little. I suppose they are quite impressive people. I saw Egwene, said I, demonstrating yesterday. She really can split threads a lot of ways, more than I've seen from anyone else. She paused. Other than Taija, said I, of course. Well, some of it's just a matter of practice, isn't it? Maybe if you tried lifting bricks with separate flows rather than in clumps, it might help you. She looked like she was about to sniff, and then her expression became thoughtful. Perhaps you have a point there, Eben. A few weeks after the raising of Alexei, Elaine and Egwene, the hall was growing fast. Recruits were flooding in and Taija was half run off her feet, keeping track of it all. She was starting to think it might soon be time for some active recruitment, though. Especially once some of the initiates were strong enough to spin gateways, which probably wouldn't be long with how hard some of them were pushing themselves. She and Tell were having to hold quite a few of them back to stop them from putting themselves into danger before they could handle it. Rand had also suggested doing outreach missions to other kingdoms once more of the initiates are trained. He needs to be getting the support of the world's rulers, and the Hall could also establish its own legitimacy at the same time while helping him by providing healing and other services. Taija was walking back from teaching a class on fine control to the initiates, one which she could teach to both men and women, given that she was more interested in the results than the actual flows, and knew enough to give advice to the men and boys too. Tell suddenly swung in out of nowhere beside her. He was underdressed, again, in some kind of vest that was all tight around his shoulders. She really needed to tell him off about that before he started distracting the initiates. He was looking pleased with himself, although Taija could tell he was trying not to. She wished she could be enjoying life as much as he seemed to be. Before Taija could say anything, he gave her a big smile. So, have you heard about Rand's plans for schools in Keemlin and Tyr? Yes. Taija wasn't not sure where he was going with it. It's a good idea. It really was. Another example of what a good kid Rand was. Not everything was about the Aes Sedai and channeling. They'd need thinkers, scientists, engineers to take the world back towards what it once was. Well, I've been talking to him about it, and one of the things that's really lacking is an understanding of the scientific method. So, Tell hesitated. Why? Olighty thought she wasn't going to like whatever he had to say. I volunteered you to teach them. What? I just thought that, well, what you dream of, it's basically science research. We both know you don't really want to be doing this, or fighting, and I can see how stressed you are and how much you're struggling, and I just thought a couple of hours a week, just rebuilding your own passions, it would make you happy, and that was all I wanted. It all came out in a rush. He actually looked very worried. It was hard to be angry, however frustrating he was right then. Oh. I thought you'd enjoy it, just sitting down with them, pointing them in the right direction, helping them stop flailing at random. We're so focused on surviving the next year or two, you've got over 500 years left in you. You can be building the foundations for that and, well, just doing something you're passionate about. Tell shrugged awkwardly. You shouldn't have been making decisions for me. That died you. Taija stopped yourself from saying it. This was nice. He'd done a nice thing for her. She should be happy. Why couldn't she be happy? She slumped. I don't have time anyway. She was already overwhelmed. She wanted to do this. He was right, for fuck's sake, but she couldn't just go neglecting things that need Edto be done because she wanted to. Tell looked at her. Why did it look so sad? I know. I thought of that too. I've also hired 2 people as assistants for you from Keemlin. Lots of experience running households between them. They can take some of the administrative burden off you. It's not just that, it's also a new tutor for the old tongue. After you made the last one storm out, he held up his hands. I know, they were terrible, it was justified, but you shouldn't be having to teach it. This one's good. Not a native speaker, obviously. Their accent's odd and vocabulary isn't quite there, but they speak it pretty much as well as Elaine. Oh, well, I suppose I should speak to them too to check, but that does free up some time. Maybe I can. Taija gave herself a shake and forced herself to behave appropriately. Thank you, Tell. I appreciate it. His tentative smile in response to that made her want to go and hide in her room and scream at the world for what it had done to her. Chapter 112, Life in the Hall. Chapter text chapter LXXI, Life in the Hall, Eben, could I have a word? He looked up from the book he'd been working his way through. It was slow going, a history of Andor. At least he'd been able to read before he came here. Some of the initiates couldn't. Taija Sedai had been visibly shocked when she found out. He supposed in the Age of Legends everybody could read. However, even though he could read the book, it was still a struggle. So many of the words were complicated, and he was having to sound some of them out. A few of the initiates had made fun of their illiterate brethren at first. That had stopped very quickly when Tell said I had found out about it. A lot of holes had been dug and filled in over the next few days. Eben slid the feather he used as a bookmark in and looked up at Helena with a smile. Of course you can. She'd been pretty unpleasant when he'd first met her, but once she stopped looking down her nose at the hall, he'd found they actually got on quite well. She looked a little uncomfortable. I need your help with something. After a glance around them, she continued. Do you promise not to tell anyone? Eben nodded. Of course. Vase has been being rather unpleasant to me. Vase. Eben had to think for a second. One of the women who'd joined the hall a bit before Benny said I had arrived. He hadn't spoken to her much, but apparently she was quite strong and a quick learner, and Helena shared a room with her. What did she do? She keeps on telling me I'm useless at channeling and will never be a real Aes Sedai. Helena really did look upset. She must be to be admitting it to him. Well, then you should tell one of the Aes Sedai. They'll put a stop to it. That was certainly true. Taija said I could be mercurial at times, but he'd come to recognize the sort of things that would trigger harsh punishment rather than amused indulgence. Saying things like that was one of them. However, Helena just shook her head vigorously. No, I don't want to do that. It just makes me look weak. He opened his mouth to protest that wasn't how it worked here, and she barreled on. I know what you're going to say, and it does matter. It matters to me. I have my pride. All right, all right. She really did look upset. What do you want to do? I'll help. As long as it wasn't something truly cruel, he added in the privacy of his own head. She gave him a big smile that immediately made offering to help worth it. Thank you. So this is what I'm thinking. That night Eben found himself standing in the corridor outside Helena and Vase's room. You're sure about this? He whispered. She gave a firm nod. Well, that was that then. No backing out now. He seized Sedin and reached out, pulling at the power through her. Suddenly she was there in his mind, a little bundle of emotions, and the female half of the power. He'd never felt it before, only had the theory explained. It was so different. It took him a little while to get the knack of submitting to Sedar while dominating Sedin, but once he had it they were ready to begin. He needed to lead since it was just the two of them in the link. He was surprised. Helena was willing to accept that actually their friendship really had grown. It wasn't showing on her face, but he could tell through the link that she was both nervous and excited. Helena quietly pushed the door open so that he could see, and then he reached out with Sedin taking hold of Vase's bed, with her fast asleep on it, and gently lifted it an inch or so off the floor. Then, ever so carefully, he began to maneuver it out of the door and into the corridor. Sedin had been necessary for this part. Apparently Vase warded her bed against Sedar. It made him wonder how much had been going on between her and Helena before. Slowly and carefully, he walked his way back down the corridor and out of the building, reinforcing his web with Sedar to reduce the strain as soon as the bed was out of the room and its wards. It took a while, but they managed to get the bed outside without waking Vase. Now for the next part, the harder part. Drawing fully on both his and Helena's strength, Eben began to lift the bed up. Higher and higher it went, until he could start to maneuver it onto the roof. Delicately he shifted it, sweating slightly from the strain of lifting so much weight that high, but he did it. As soon as the bed settled onto the building's flat roof, he breathed out a sigh of relief before spinning air in a barrier round it, using Sedar so that Vase would be able to see it when she woke up. It was meant to be a prank, not to actually put her in danger of falling. He was just finishing up when a hand descended on his shoulder. With a shout of surprise, he lost his grip on the power, both Sedar and Sedin fleeing him. Eben, Helena, what exactly are the two of you doing up at this time of night? Alexei Sedai glanced up at the roof where Vace's bed was just visible. Is that what I think it is? Eben briefly considered lying, and then nodded. Yes, Alexei Sedai, you see Vace was. He saw Helena grimace at him, and quickly changed what he was about to say. Vace and Helena are playing jokes on each other, a sort of friendly prank war, and I was just helping Helena for this round. Alexei Sedai glanced up again. I see. Did his lips twitch? Do you really think that's acceptable behavior for an initiate of the Hall? What would have happened if your control had slipped or Vace had fallen? What if she'd woken up while you were lifting her? I'll see you both at sunrise tomorrow. Now go to bed. I'll get her down. The next morning, Eben found himself noting down a tally of grains of rice on a tablet as he moved them from one basket to another, Helena beside him. Thinking about it, Alexei Sedai couldn't have been too annoyed as he'd set them to do the punishment beside each other. Helena glanced up at him and gave him a smile, and suddenly it was almost worth getting caught. She really was very pretty when she smiled. Semirage. What in the great Lord's name happened? A fucking disaster, that is what happened. Gone, a year's work with the Cinchen just gone. I returned to the Imperial Palace and was ambushed by leashed outside rooms. If I did not suffer from a healthy sense of paranoia, I would be wearing one of their fucking collars. Messana hissed. How did they find out about you? I do not know. Someone must have told them who I was. One of us, one of the chosen. Who else? After I escaped, I found out from my agents that they had captured a leashed who distinctly resembled Greendel, although the description was not quite right. She was wearing too much. So it was Greendel. Demandrid scowled. She has gone too far this time. Action will need to be taken. That is the thing, Semirage's voice rose in despair. I do not even know that it was her. This leashed apparently died teaching the Cinchen a new web, possibly traveling. There was a severely mutilated corpse. I also went to visit Greendel just to check, and the woman was exactly where she should be, looking as pleased with her pets as ever. I just do not know. It was so good to have her mother back with her. Elaine owed Perrin more than she could say for that. That did not stop her from scowling at him now that she had him alone. What were you thinking? She was too angry to try to swear. She's my mother, Perrin. Perrin blushed deeply. Elaine, it's not what you think, it just sort of happened. Just sort of happened. How exactly does that sort of thing just happen with a woman old enough to be your mother? Ah, your mother is a very determined woman. She what? How dare you, Perrin? Or do you expect me to call you father now? Elaine, please. She could not speak to him. With a small shriek of rage, Elaine stormed out. Her and her mother were going to have words. I'm sorry, my queen. The boy cannot be found anywhere. Morgase sighed to herself. Very well then, you are dismissed. Send my husband in. A minute later, Perrin came in, closing the door behind him. You look annoyed. They were alone. She could relax. Morgase let her royal mask fall away and grimaced. I am trying to find your friend. If he's going to insist on courting my daughter, then I want to at least have met him. Perrin put a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, he was always like that. If he doesn't want to be found, then he'll make himself hard to find. Where is his loyalty to his queen? How can I trust him to I am sorry, I know he is your friend? There was no point berating Perrin over this. It's all right, I understand. Look, I know him. He's not going to do anything to hurt Elaine. He might not be the most solid of people, but he never does anything to hurt anyone. No, he sounded nothing like Perrin. Elaine was still young, had not suffered what she had. Perhaps she should let her have her flighty liaisons, as long as she did not end up with child with the man. Not unless they were properly married anyway, and that would not happen without her agreement. For her, there was Perrin. Solid, reliable, everything that had been missing from her life in recent times, everything she needed. She leant into his side. Alone with him she could be herself, show some vulnerability. Eventually, Perrin broke the comfortable silence. I know it's going to be bothering you. Why don't I go and have a word with him? He won't hide from me. Knowing Elaine, she's probably telling him exactly how to hide from you, but if I tell him it's important, he'll listen. Morgase smiled and clasped his hand tight. Thank you, Perrin. Meeting you really has been a blessing from the Creator. Matt looked up from his drink when Perrin came in. Nobility seemed to be suiting him. He was well dressed and looking as neatly groomed as he ever did. Well, good for him. Nobility wasn't for Matt, though. Not bloody likely that he'd be caught dressed up like some bloody lord. Either way, it would be nice to catch up with his friend. He waved at him and pushed a chair out with his foot before gesturing a barmaid over. A nice-looking lady, not that he was looking, not now. The two of them clinked glasses and took a swig of their drink and then descended into an awkward silence. Perrin broke it eventually. "So you're courting Elaine? I'm not bloody caught." Matt scowled. "I suppose after this long perhaps I am." "Fine, yes." Matt raised his eyebrows. "And you're flaming well married to her mother." "Yes." "Well, this is weird." "Yes." They both looked down at their empty mugs. "Another drink?" "Yes, please." They took another swig. "I'm not going to call you, do you know?" Perrin spat a mouthful of beer across the table. "For light's sake, Matt, that's not funny. I'm just saying, you can take on all the airs you want, but not that." "Light, Matt." Perrin took another aggrieved swig of ale. "Look, since you brought it up, you really should go and see Morgase the Queen." "Not flaming likely." He shook his head vigorously. "I've had more than enough of nobility. You're courting a princess." "Exactly." "Anyway, why does Morgase want to see me? Nothing good can come of it." Perrin groaned. "She just wants to make sure you're not going to hurt her daughter. Nothing more. She's not looking to imprison you or execute you or turn you into a flaming noble. If you keep avoiding her guardsmen, she might change her mind about at least one of those, though." Matt studied him for a moment. "You promise that's all? Just a conversation? Nothing more?" "I promise." "Fine, I'll go." He'd need to get a nicer coat, something with a little lace, but not too much. Normally he wouldn't bother, but this was Elaine's mother. He should at least try to make a good impression. "There's a good son." Matt considered throwing his mug at Perrin. Equals equals equals. The five initiates sat around a small fire on the edge of the hall's grounds. Earth channeled into seats and a barrier of air up to keep the wind off them. Eben was trying not to stare at Helena too obviously, so instead he watched Inale take a sip from the skin of wine Yer had found somewhere and then pass it to Dama. "So what are you going to do now that the taint's gone, when you become Aes Sedai?" Inale was a broad-faced Andoran woman, probably in her 30s. Dama took a deep pull from the skin, his leathery face twisting slightly at the taste. Wiping his mouth, he thought for a second. "I'm going to be a healer." That made sense. He'd already shown a great deal of talent for it. Not just any healer, though. "I'm going to bring healing back to where it was in the Age of Legends." Taija and Tel said I might not know so much about it, but if Nynaeve said I can do that with Sedar, well, when I'm Aes Sedai, they'll talk about us in the same sentence. He gave a slightly embarrassed smile. He made as if to pass Eben the skin and then hesitated. "Are you sure you're old enough to be drinking Eben?" "I'm 20. He lied, grabbing the skin off Dama and quickly taking a big gulp of it to hide the way his face heated. "As you say. So what about you, Eben? What do you want?" "Me, I want." How to say this without sounding stupid. When Taija Sedai told us about the crystal spires in the Second Age, he'd learnt by now not to call it the Age of Legends. Helping build the hall, I want to be a builder. But not just any old builder, I want to build new wonders of the world. Towering spires, beautiful bridges, a palace for every man and woman. He passed the wineskin to Helena, who was sat between him and Yer. "Your turn, Helena." She looked dubiously at it for a second, and then took a drink. She really had loosened up since she'd come to the hall. It was strange to think of how full of herself she'd been when he first met her. The light of the flames cast flickering shadows across her delicate face, and he reminded himself again not to stare. "All I really thought about was becoming Aes Sedai, but I think I want to be a diplomat, bringing peace between kingdoms, traveling the world, making new friends and bashing heads together, making the world a better place without war. What about you, Yer?" She passed the skin to the aleman. He took a long swig. "I will serve, without thought of honor or glory." They all stared at him for a second until Dama spoke up. Eben suspected the rest of them were a little scared of Yer, despite his mild mannerisms, but Dama was made of tougher stuff. "All right, but we all plan to serve. That's what being Aes Sedai is about, but how will you serve? What do you really want?" Yer didn't show any expression as he considered his answer. "It is hard to explain to one who is not Ale." He hesitated, "But I shall try." When a man of the Ale finds that he can channel, he goes to spit in Sightblinder's eye. This means he travels to the Blight to fight the Shadow Spawn until he dies. It is all a man could, do with the curse of the taint upon him. Eben winced at the idea. Although was that any worse than being taken and gentled by the tower Aes Sedai? At least there'd be some purpose to losing your life that way, not just quietly dying in misery. Now that Taija Sedai and the Karakan have cleansed Sedin, that fate is no more. I would have gone anyway, but the wise ones were firm. So now I am here. When I first touched Sedin, they told me I was also touched by the point of destiny's spear. My dream was over, so now I must find a new dream. Before I would have spat in Sightblinder's eye until I woke from the dream. Now I shall thrust my spear through Sightblinder's heart. That got a round of hears. Finally, the skin made its way back to Inalair, and their eyes turned to her. I want to teach. Sedar is a gift I never thought I would have. I would have lived and died working on my family's farm. Now I'm learning how the world works and how to change it. I want to show that to other people too. Her words had a quiet intensity to them. Chapter 113. Benny gets a surprise. Chapter text, chapter LXXZI. Benny gets a surprise. One evening, Taija was sat with Benny in her room drinking tea together, one of the few pleasures left to her in life. After a pause in their discussion about the differences between how novices and initiates were taught, Benny frowned slightly. I had been meaning to bring this up some time ago, but I had hoped it would not be necessary. What is going on between you and Tel'Janin? You have been ever so cagey about him ever since I first asked, and it is clearly making you miserable. Taija tried to keep her face calm, channel her inner Moirin. What do you think is going on? If you're asking me, you must think you know something. Not bad, my dear, you are improving, but you are a long way off the tower Aes Sedai yet. Benny smiled. Still, I shall indulge you. The two of you clearly have a great deal of history, and the way you look at him worries me. Taija sighed. Well, Tell is from my time too, obviously. Benny nodded. Of course she'd worked that out. His route here was a bit different, though. Taija hesitated. Until a year ago, he was known as Samil. She paused for Benny's gasp. The Aes Sedai just smiled faintly. Yes, well, I suppose there were only two possibilities, that or one of these stasis boxes you've mentioned. Taija tried not to scowl too hard at Benny's refusal to be surprised. The real question is, why is he still alive? You do not strike me as particularly forgiving when it comes to dark friends. Why is he here? Taija seriously considered telling her to piss off, or that it was too painful to talk about, but maybe she should just talk. She hadn't really talked about this with anyone, and she did trust Benny. Back in her time, when she'd had friends, they'd have been able to talk together, cry together, and get her back on track. Here it was just Taija, but maybe it didn't have to be. Taija took a moment to think. I'll explain, but I'll need to tell you the whole story. From the beginning. It's more than painful for me to talk about it, so don't interrupt me, please. If I stop, I might not start again. She took a deep breath. I first met Tell around 10 years before the war started. He was very well known around the world as an athlete and a politician. I was a leading scholar. One of our friends introduced us. She went on to tell Benny about her relationship with Tell, introducing him to her family, moving in with him, the war, training together, working out ways to fight and kill. Taija brushed over the most painful bits, how deeply she felt for him, the death of her family, the start of the war, but she told Benny enough, all the way through to her last night with him when they got engaged. So he went to the shadow because you died. No, Taija's vehemence surprised her. Yes, maybe. I don't know. It's not my fault. The last words were a mumble. Taija dear, of course it is not your fault. No one could blame you for the actions of a man. But he had his reasons, and it seems he also returned to the light because of you, if he truly has. He must have. He's done so much. Risked his life, saved me, saved Rand. He could have sabotaged the cleansing. He could have killed us all. Tell me more. I tend to think you are too trusting, my dear. What has he done that can make you say that? Taija slowly, painfully recounted what she'd learned. The things Tell had told her, the things she'd worked out. I even tested him with a false binding rod, our oath rod. I made an illusion of it and asked him to swear that he was loyal to the light and would obey me until the last battle. He knows the thing would cut his lifespan in half, but he didn't protest. He was willing. Benny twitched. It does. I mean, you did. Fascinating. I suppose his usefulness kept him alive at first, and now he has established a degree of trust. Taija sighed. Yes, I think his return to the light is genuine, but you still cannot fully trust or forgive him. Yes, that is more than understandable. For everyone else, his betrayal was abstract. For you, it was personal. She suddenly changed tack. You do know how he looks at you when you're not looking? No. Like a man who is in love but knows he will never have what he wants. Taija scowled deeply. Well, he did a good job of ensuring that. Benny gave her a gentle smile. Of course, but how do you feel about him, truly? I don't know. At first I hated him more than I've ever hated anyone in the world. Now I'm just tired. I have to work with him every day. I'm reminded of everything we had whenever I see him. We work so well together. I depend on him now, and he's always there when I need him. If he wasn't here, I'd have cracked weeks ago. But him being here is also making me want to go and hide in a corner and cry, and it just keeps coming back to that. That it's how it should be, but it's all wrong and I just can't stop thinking about it. Sometimes I just want to throw myself at him and have him tell me everything will be all right. Others, I want to beat him into a pulp for what he's done. I trust he's returned to the light, at least consciously, but I still wake up gasping with terror because of nightmares. Happy dreams where we're together again, or we were never apart. Then he tells me it'd always been dark, and I'm a naive idiot. Fooling me in my time, and now fooling me again, just waiting for to lower my guard. When he was restored to the title of Aes Sedai, he said all he really wanted was to see me happy again, and for fuck's sake I actually believe him. But he's the cause of so much pain, and not just for me. Every time I see him, it just reminds me of how every single person who could really understand is dead. And I'm just so lonely. She suddenly choked off a sob. It had all come out in a rush, and Taija felt her cheeks heat. She'd said far more than she meant to and potentially insulted her friend. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that, she muttered, looking down. Taija dear, you really are a mess. Benny gave her hand a squeeze. I am so sorry. It is hard to know what to say. My advice, you are lost in this past of yours. You need to think about yourself in the present. I do not mean the problems, but focusing on finding your own happiness now. Will be, but you need to look after yourself. Forget about Tell, forget about what happened. Focus on yourself. She looked Taija in the eyes and emphasized her words. You are allowed to be happy. Duty is important, but it is not everything. You have what? Another 150 years of life in you. Think about what will make you happy and then do it. Worry about Tell once you have made yourself happy. It was good advice, but Taija's contrarian side insisted she had to correct Benny. It also let Taija avoid acknowledging that she was right. Closer to 600 years. Taija muttered, Excuse me. Finally, Benny looked surprised at something, although Taija wasn't sure why. It wasn't long after her conversation with Benny that Taija traveled to Keemlin for her first teaching session at Rand's new school. Looking over the disparate group of individuals seated in front of her, she resisted the urge to grin too widely. Hello, my name is Taija Kosola Murinen, but you can call me Professor Kosola. Damn, it felt good to call herself that again. Taija paused. First, we're going to get to know each other. Then I'm going to start on the scientific method. I'll begin with a general overview, and then in future sessions, we'll get into more depth on specific aspects. As she talked, she pondered whether she could persuade Rand to call the place a university. After the class, Taija was in the best mood she'd been in for quite a while. It was a bit too close to teaching undergraduates, but actually, she missed even that. She'd spent more time than she probably should have excitedly planning the class, and then once she was delivering it, everything just came together so well. Benny had told her she needed to be happier. Well, that made her happier, no question. Even the fact that it was Tell's idea didn't taint it. That was why Taija had a bounce in her step as she headed over to see Rand off. He was going away for one of his new outreach missions. Apparently it was a combination of his, Moirin, and Morgase's thinking that he should be going and establishing relations with other nations, demonstrating his power and offering both a carrot and stick. Andor was an example. They didn't need to be conquered by him. They could choose to support him, and this was the route towards it. Taija's contribution to the idea was that he would take whole Aes Sedai or initiates with him. They could provide services in the kingdoms he visited and raise the prestige, or even just awareness, of the whole at the same time. The Tower Sedai sat around and did nothing. The Hall could offer powerful channelers with healing or building skills, or who could transport people. It would buy influence and raise questions about why the Tower was so useless. This time Rand was heading off with only full Aes Sedai, both hall and tower, plus his coterie of maidens. But once the initiates had progressed enough and Taija, Tell and Rand had decided it was safe she'd send them with him. There were already so many demands on the Aes Sedai's time, and it would be good experience for the initiates. Taija Sedai. Tame bowed politely. Mazrim, thank you for dropping by. Taija gave him a slightly shallower bow of her own. Please, have a seat. Can I get you some tea? I also have wine if you would prefer. Thank you, tea would be fine. He still had a bit of a sardonic smirk on his face, but his tone was at least respectful. Actually, Taija was starting to wonder whether it was just the way his face was rather than a deliberate expression. As he took a seat, she poured him a cup of tea and made one for herself. Since the beating she'd administered, he'd been behaving himself. There'd been no open disrespect to any Aes Sedai. Not even Benny, although his feelings towards the Tower Sedai were clear. Taija could live with that. He didn't have to like them, just not be rude to them. He'd even started interacting with the initiates in a more normal way, and the basic classes on channeling had been good for him. After some quick pleasantries, Taija got to the meat of the matter. So, Mazrim, where do you see this going? What do you want from this? She gestured vaguely around herself. To his credit, he stopped to think for a few seconds before he replied. I think what I truly want is to be able to live in peace, without the threat of the Aes Sedai or of the shadow looming over me, to be strong enough that I can defend myself from anyone who wants to take that away from me. Taija nodded. I can understand that as a goal, although the shadow won't be leaving any of us in peace until the last battle has been won. He winced slightly. Regardless, stay here, keep progressing as you have been, and you'll have nothing to fear from the Tower Aes Sedai. She didn't trust him as far as she could throw him, which, given their respective sizes, wasn't very far at all. The man had a hunger for power. However, better to have him on the inside of the tent pissing out. He was behaving himself, contributing to the hall, and people did change. Not as fast as he was pretending, but over time. If he kept on pretending for long enough, one day he might get out of bed and realize he meant it. Tame nodded, and Taija continued. I think that there's a lot you could contribute too. Why don't we discuss what you'd be able to teach? Hopefully status as a teacher would satisfy him for now. It wasn't realistic to hold the man at the level of an initiate, but equally until Taija was more sure of him, she had no intention of teaching him more advanced techniques. An external teacher was a respectable and honored position. She wasn't a Tower Aes Sedai. Not everyone had to be Aes Sedai to be important. Begin. Taija watched as the group of 6 initiates started to move. She followed after them, keeping a safe distance. On the other side of the copse, Taija knew Egwene was wading on top of a small mound. It was quite funny, actually. A year or so ago it was Egwene and the others trying to get to Taija while she sat on a hill. Now Egwene was the one up there, waiting. The initiates had split into 2 groups of 3, mixing genders in both. One group was jogging round the back of the trees. It looked like they were going to try to flank Egwene. The other was much more slowly and carefully making its way towards the edge of the copse where they'd be able to see her. The women had masked their channeling with inverted, tied-off webs, although they wouldn't be able to invert the webs in active combat, not at their skill level. Their tactics weren't bad, actually. They were certainly doing better than the first try from Taija's own group back in Tyr, although they didn't have anywhere near the same raw strength available to them. As they moved in, Taija ambled out into the open to watch, careful not to look anywhere in particular and risk giving their strategy away to Egwene. Nothing happened for a little while. Taija could see Egwene was starting to get a bit antsy. Technically, if she got bored enough, she was allowed to go looking for them, but since it was the initiate's first time, Taija caught Egwene's eye and shook her head. Fortunately, it wasn't too long after that the attack started. The 3 hiding in the copse lashed out with the power. Eben, Inalair, and Varava. Taija was fairly sure they were deliberately making a bigger, cruder display than they needed to. Egwene responded immediately. Webs of Sedar flying out, their webs vanishing in mid-air. One of her webs touched Varava, who stiffened, and then stood up, her hands in the air, and began to retreat. A moment later, Eben did the same. Although Taija didn't see a web good going for Egwene, inverting under stress, she'd really come on well. Still, Taija made a note to remind Egwene that she should have used the inverted web on the women, not the man. It was a useful challenge for Egwene to be doing this too. 6-on-1 wasn't easy numbers to overcome, even with the relative inexperience of the initiates. Before Egwene could tag Varava, the flanking group attacked. Yer and Jahar must have taken the lead there because Taija didn't see the webs, but Egwene was suddenly defending frantically. Sedar was added to the attackers' mix as Gwenora joined in. An excellent ambush. Egwene should have anticipated it better. She knew there were 6 of them. However, she did get some points for being ready enough that the invisible Sedin webs didn't actually connect with her, even if they came close. Yer was moving as he spun. However, the other 2 were stood in the open, focused on Egwene. It was a matter of seconds before she'd removed them both from the exercise. Then it was just her, Yer and Varava. Despite his almost acrobatic evasion, Yer simply didn't have the strength to stop her, and neither did Varava. With the 2 of them fighting alone against Egwene, it didn't take her long to finish things off. Exercise done, Taija clapped her hands together, using a web to amplify the sound before she spun gateways to bring everyone back together. Time for a debrief. The initiates would be asked to critique themselves first, then to comment on Egwene's own actions, respectfully of course. Then she could give them feedback. Taija would fill in the gaps as needed. No stupid hierarchy here. If someone had a good idea, then it should be listened to, whatever their rank. Chapter 114. Interlude Roman 29, The Golden Core. Chapter text Interlude Roman 29, The Golden Core. A few years before the War of Power, Taija tried to keep track of where Nerina was. Her niece seemed to be practically bouncing off the walls. You didn't feed her sugar before we came, did you? No, she's just excited to be out with you and tell. Her mother laughed. Far too much energy, that girl. You were much quieter at her age, although you had your moments too. Why, I remember when you first started channeling. She saw the expression on Taija's face and hurriedly continued. Anyway, thank you for offering to take her out. It'll be nice to have some peace and quiet for the day without her rocketing around bothering me. Her words didn't seem to bother Nerina, who'd started jumping up and down on the spot. Well, I'm sure we'll have a great time. Taija did her best not to look dubious and studiously ignored the way Tell was silently counting out Nerina's jumps. Come on, Tell, Nerina, let's go. Nerina was out the door in a flash, and as they made their way down the stairs to the outside street, she barely stopped talking. So are we going to travel there? I've only traveled once before, and it was so cool. I know, I made the gateway. Taija ignored Nerina's stuck-out tongue. Can Tell make the gateway this time? Is it different when he makes it? Tell laughed. No, it's just the same. But anyway, we won't be traveling. What do you mean we won't? How will we get there then? I know where the Golden Core is. It's near Paran Disen, and if you don't travel, that takes... Nerina thought for a second, a long time. Who said anything about a Golden Core? Taija carefully kept a straight face. I thought we could have a nice bus ride to the library and do some reading. That was met with a horrified silence for a few seconds. Then Nerina was all hurt dignity. Is this one of your jokes, Auntie Taija? It's not very funny, but I thought you liked reading. Mum was telling me all about how you've been enjoying the adventures of Detective Sulo. It's not the same. Nerina folded her arms and pouted. They stopped at a bus stop and her eyes widened. You were joking, weren't you? Well, you got such good grades in school this year that the library seemed like a great reward. Tell gave Taija a disapproving look. Don't be cruel. Taija laughed. Well, what did I tell you about traveling safely last time? Traveling can be very dangerous because gateways can cut through anything, including people, and so you should only travel to and from specific, safe places. Nerina recited the words after a moment's thought and Tell's eyebrows rose. Taija shrugged and ruffled Nerina's hair, ignoring her niece's attempt at avoiding it. She's a bright girl, so where might we be getting the bus to? A specific, safe place. Suddenly Nerina's excitement was back in full force. I knew you were joking. Golden Core. An hour or so later, Taija, Nerina and Tell reached the entrance gates to the Golden Core. Nerina had been briefly disappointed that Tell's gateway looked the same as Taija's, but actually listened to Taija's explanation of the differences in how men and women spun gateways. Neon lights flashed around them. Illusions of planets, spaceships, and fantastical creatures whirled overhead, and from inside the towering walls, they could hear the sound of happy screams and shouting. It was an impressive entrance for Paran Disen's newest theme park, and as Nerina had informed them several times on the way there, the best one in the world. Getting in was a matter of moments. Tell just scanned the pre-bought, fast-track tickets on his phone at the gate, and they were through, lifted up on an invisible platform over the walls, and skipping the hours-long queue that stretched outside. There were advantages to dating a rich celebrity. There were also disadvantages, Taija noted slightly sourly, as a group of young women nudged each other and pointed at the three of them. Can we go on the dragon riders of Pren first, Uncle Tell? Nerina had clearly decided which of them would be the softer touch. Tell caught Taija's eye over Nerina's head. Taija shrugged. She'll know what's good. She's probably read the website all the way through twice. I have, Nerina proudly agreed. Well, Tell grinned. Then we can hardly say no. Where's this Pren dragon ride? Since you know all about it, you can navigate us. Nerina didn't hesitate, dragging them over to a giant display board with a map of the park, little animated figures moving to show the ride's locations. She had an impressive sense of direction, at least when they were going somewhere she wanted to. In no time, at all the three of them found themselves at the ride, again able to skip most of the queue. As they waited in the underground tunnel leading to the ride, dragons flew across the walls and ceiling, breathing fire at strange creatures, twisting and twirling as they battled through the sky. Nerina was staring intently at them, practically vibrating with excitement, and oblivious to the other two. Her distraction at least gave Taija the opportunity to chat with Tell. So I've managed to get the day booked off next week so I can come and see your match. Oh, you don't need to do that. I'm well aware fencing isn't your thing. Despite his words, he had a hint of a pleased smile tugging at the edge of his lips. Nonsense, you'll be defending your title. It's important and I want to be there. She shot a glance at the still distracted Nerina, and you know I enjoy watching you. Taija's grin turned a little mischievous. Well, I'll do my best to put on a good show. Maybe you can have an autograph afterwards, too. Oh, you're too kind. I'm beyond honored. Taija was cut off by the man behind them in the queue. Tell Janin Alinsar, by the light it is, sir, it is an honor to see you here. The man's cut-glass Paran Disen accent contrasted irritatingly with Taija's harsher Adanza tones. Your last match was true genius. I am very much a fan of your work. The final exchange was pure artistry. Ah, well, thank you for your kind words, but the man was not to be discouraged. Would not have thought that a man of your stature would be here queuing in a theme park, though. His eyes flicked down to Nerina. Oh, an excursion with your daughter, perhaps. How sweet, and her nanny. Taija was about to say something before Tell exploded when Nerina piped up, clearly having chosen this moment to start paying attention again. She's not my nanny, she's Tell's girlfriend. He's super nice. I see. The man gave Taija a skeptical look out of the corner of his eye, ignoring her raised eyebrows. Well, I shall not bother you any further then. Before any of them could say any more, the queue moved forward, taking Taija, Tell, and Nerina along to board the ride. Taija was grumbling to herself after that, and she could see Tell was in a bit of a sulk too, repeatedly glancing behind himself in irritation. That was until Nerina hit him on the arm. Stop sulking. Nerina, Taija gasped. You can't just go hitting people. Tell told me I could hit him whenever I wanted, though. Taija gave Tell a look that promised words later. Nope, you can't just hit people. What if you hurt them? Tell is setting a terrible example and you mustn't listen to him. Tell laughed. She's not going to hurt me. That's not the point, and you know it. But look, he stopped sulking. As they bickered good-naturedly, a teenage attendant strapped them into their seats with a warning not to try to get out until they were released. Taija heard the physical restraint click into place and felt the force field settle around her torso too. She quickly looked over Nerina to make sure she was properly secured too, and then reached over and grabbed Tell's hand. The obnoxious man was now forgotten. Tell looked almost as excited as Nerina to be there. It was cute, really. Sometimes he was just a giant kid. A moment later, Taija felt Nerina's smaller hand grab hers from the other side. She met her niece's excited eyes and gave her a grin at the same time as she squeezed her hand. While she could think of things she might rather do than go to a theme park, at that moment there was nowhere she'd rather have been. Then, with a roar, the ride started. Their seats were on a platform shaped to be like a dragon's back, and with a shudder it started to move. Huge wings appeared to each side of them, and the snake-like neck of a dragon ahead. The whole platform shook, and the domed roof above them vanished. Finally, with a jolt that forced Taija back into her seat, they were launched violently into the air. It was exhilarating as they shot upwards, the giant wings beating on each side of them to the sound of the dragon's roars. They climbed almost vertically, going hundreds of meters above the huge theme park before their momentum ran out, and the dragon rolled over into an almost vertical dive. Nerina and Tel whooped with joy while around them people screamed. Taija just happily held onto their hands. She might not have been a screamer, but that didn't mean she wasn't enjoying it. Then Taija's composure was broken, and she let out a shriek of her own as a burst of flame blasted over their heads, and another dragon passed them. She'd actually felt the heat from that, and its huge beating wings buffeted them as it flew by, more screaming riders on its back. Their own dragon roared a challenge and suddenly snapped into a tight turn, pursuing its rival and blasting fire at it. What followed was a stomach-churning aerial dance over the theme park, culminating in a steep climb and dive with the two dragons spiraling around each other, blasting out flames. All too soon it was over, their dragon landing back in its dome, the roof folding closed over it, and young attendants coming and unstrapping them. Despite having enjoyed it, Taija felt a bit unsteady on her feet as she staggered away. Tel and Nerina, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed, chatting happily to each other as she tottered behind them. Then when it dived like that, it was so fast, just zoom. Nerina made a diving, chopping motion with her hand to accompany the words. I know, and the fire was so close, it was lucky our dragon was better. The worst, or maybe best, thing was Tel wasn't even really humoring Nerina. Taija was quite sure he was pretty much as into it as he was acting. He was into anything high adrenaline, really. She had no idea how he'd survived into his second century. As Taija shook her head affectionately at the thought, her mind went on to how the ride's designers done it. Some combination of technology and Turingreal, of course. It had probably cost an absolute fortune. She'd winced when she saw how much Tel had spent on the fast-track tickets. Anti-gravity generators would have done the job for getting the two dragons into the air. Then Nerina interrupted her thoughts. Auntie Taija, you don't look very happy. Didn't you enjoy the ride? Taija quickly pulled herself back to the real world. Oh no, it was great fun, very exciting. I was just trying to figure out how it worked. See, you could use anti-gravity generators in an array under the platform to generate the lift, then a Turingreal with a bit of programming for the wings and head. The real question is what they were doing to get the movement like that. I think maybe if you applied webs of air, I suppose from a Turingreal, in the right way you could. She blinked at Nerina's outraged face. What? You're ruining it. It was a dragon. Dragons can fly, and it was cool. But Tel put his hand on Taija's shoulder. Of course it was a dragon, silly. Nerina sighed and put on her most knowing tone. I know you like explaining things, Auntie Taija, and you can tell Uncle Tel all about it once you're home, but I don't want to hear it. I want to think about dragons. Taija gave her a look and then relented. As you command. Tel, prepare yourself for when we get this monster off our hands. I can't wait. By mid-afternoon, even Nerina was flagging. They were queuing for the spaceships of Tarak, which promised to take them through the mysterious hyperdimensions between worlds as they fought off asteroid pirates. Luckily, Tel had given her a look before she'd started explaining to Nerina why that was unrealistic. Even Taija could admit that Nerina didn't really need to know much about dimensional physics. Not yet, anyway. Anyway, if she had started, no doubt her niece would have given her an exasperated look and told her she knew it wasn't real, but she wanted to enjoy it. The young woman in front of them kept glancing back. Another Tel Jan and Fan, no doubt. Taija sometimes wanted to suggest he walk around under an illusion, but then that might cause problems with some of the identity checking systems that were up in places these days. Light knew what the world was coming to when the government needed to be watching for criminals and terrorists like that. Also, she liked looking at him. She sighed internally as the woman seemed to gather her courage and turned round. She could feel Tel stiffening slightly too. I'm really sorry to bother you, but are you Taija Kosola Murinen? Taija's irritated train of thought came to a crashing halt. Ah, yes. Oh, I thought so. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say what a fan of your work I am. I lecture in physics in MGIN, and your work is truly inspirational. I use your lecture series on esoteric particle detection as part of the material for my core classes. Thank you. I'm honored. Taija really had no idea how to deal with this, This sort of thing was Tell's job. As if sensing her discomfort, the woman spoke quickly. Anyway, you have a beautiful daughter and partner. You're a very lucky woman. I'll get out of your hair. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated what you do. With that, she turned back to her own group, leaving a stunned Taija, an amused Tell, and an oblivious Nerina behind. At the end of the day, Taija and Tell returned to her mother's apartment with an exhausted Nerina. Not that Taija had all that much more energy after wrangling her all day. Tell, on the other hand, seemed to have boundless energy and had sat her on his shoulders when she started grumbling about being tired. She was too big for that, really, but he was more than strong enough to haul an adult around easily enough. Taija knew that from experience. Once Nerina had been successfully returned to her grandmother, they headed away, hand in hand. She's such a handful. Can we maybe do something a bit less energetic tomorrow? I don't want to keel over at work on Monday. Tell grinned smugly. Well, I need to train in the morning. Yes, I know, I'll be there too. Not that she could keep up with him, but it was still fun joining in, and he avoided the more violent training when he knew she'd be along. But I've got a nice surprise for you in the afternoon, Tell smoothly continued as if she hadn't interrupted. Oh, a surprise. I like surprises. Tell me, what is it? It won't be a surprise if I tell you. Okay, I hate surprises. Tell me. She poked him in the side. The hard muscle made it feel like poking a wall. Nope. She poked him again harder. Ow, try to be more pokeable, also tell me. Nope, it's a surprise. The present day Taija groggily opened her eyes and pushed herself back up. She must have fallen asleep at her desk. Of course it had just been a dream. All that was gone. She took in her office's plain, stone walls. Painful memories that she tried not to think about until her subconscious made her revisit them. But now she wanted to grasp at them, hold those vividly happy moments close to her for just a little longer. Tell's surprise had turned out to be some kind of exclusive luxury resort. They'd finished up the day lying in their own private infinity pool, pressed against each other, and watching the sunset over a forest that stretched across the horizon. He'd even listened to her theories on how they made the rides work. Another perfect moment with him in a long series of perfect moments. With a growl, Taija dipped her pen into the ink and turned her attention back to her paperwork. It hardly mattered. It was all gone now. The golden core was ashes. Being next to Paran Disen, it had no doubt survived the war, not like a dancer, just to be destroyed in the breaking. Perhaps one of its Turangriel had survived as a wonder to be preserved in the White Tower and somehow used to abuse their novices. There were no infinity pools or exclusive resorts anymore either. Tell had helped make sure of all that. Why couldn't she just ignore him? Why couldn't she just move on and be happy? She started to write a note on a supply report, scratching out the words with the shitty third-age pen she was forced to use. What had she even done to deserve this? The man she loved dangled in front of her every day, a reminder of everything she'd lost and everything she wanted, all while she knew full well what he'd done to end it all. Taija wiped a tear off her cheek. Fuck the world, the pattern and everything that had brought her here. She would do her duty, but she still wished she hadn't survived. Chapter 115. Aes Sedai and Aes Sedai wannabes. Chapter LXXiv Aes Sedai and Aes Sedai wannabes. Benny had been watching him since she joined the hall. Not that he would know. Now that she had spoken to Taija, it was time to act on that, though. Tell, might I have a moment of your time? He smiled at her. Of course, what can I do for you? Benny could see why Taija had liked him. He had fine features, a fit, well-muscled body, and more than a little charisma to him. Why, if she were 50 years younger? I was hoping to discuss a couple of things. Tell nodded. Let's walk and talk then. I have a few minutes before my next class. Have you noticed that there is some tension between young Fedwin and Seshta? No, I can't say I have. Men often were a little blind to such things. Well, I believe there is. It would be sensible of us to keep an eye on them. There is some hostility there, and they are both young. I would not want it to break out into something more. No, indeed not. Thank you. I'll keep a closer watch on them. You said there were a couple of things. Oh, yes, of course. I was also hoping to discuss the best way to integrate my classes with the wider philosophy of the hall. Modern politics is easy, of course, but etiquette is more difficult. I know the ways of the current world, but it seems a waste to have initiates having to pick up on your own time's etiquette by themselves, rather than being taught at least the basics. Yes, I suppose that's true. My time. I suppose you've been speaking to Taija. Well, naturally, but it would not be that difficult to guess. She did not want to seem too absent-minded. Taija might enjoy her company despite that. She had the feeling that Tell would be looking for something a bit different, not a bumbling, distracted historian. Although, that being said, it would still be fascinating to get his perspective on his time in the future. Not now, though, for now her mind needed to be on business. Aleda sat at her desk half reading a report. She should be asleep. It was a ridiculous hour, but she could not sleep. She had not been able to sleep properly for weeks. Where had everything gone wrong? And there was no question. Things had gone badly wrong. She was not sure how or what, but she felt the tower slipping from her grasp. The world, in fact. The walls were closing in around her. Every day fewer and fewer good choices. Absent-mindedly, she reached for her desk drawer and then stopped herself. Cadswain's announcement to the tower, that was the moment she had started to realize. Oh, she had not believed it then, of course. The idea was ludicrous. But after that, things had started to change around the tower. Just small things, the way people looked at her, the things people said. Nothing that would trigger suspicion, and yet her musings were broken by the sensation of her outer wards being triggered. She had not been sure why she had woven them. She was the Amulin in the White Tower. Yet she had. Was it just mad paranoia? Was that light-damned woman Cadswain getting to her? A moment later, there was a tentative knock at her door. Aleda relaxed slightly. Anyone who knocked like that could hardly be a threat, although Light only knew why they were bothering her at this ridiculous hour. She was tempted to ignore them, to go back to her own musings, but perhaps she should see who it was. Enter. She held herself on the edge of embracing Sedar. She did not expect to see Rieko Caravan open the door a crack and slip inside before dropping a deep curtsy, the bells in her hair tinkling with the movement. Mother, thank the light you are awake. Aleda fought the urge to chastise the woman. Her composure was gone. She looked both terrified and relieved. Of course, she was one of the very few blues to have remained in the tower after Siwan Sanch's violent departure, and that did not endear her to Aleda either. If not for the politics of it, she would have abolished the blue adger. She had scars from whatever the former Amulin had done in that corridor. What is it, daughter? Why have you come to disturb me? She did not keep the irritation out of her voice. Rather than answering immediately, Rieko studied her face for a few long seconds. Just before Aleda could say something, Rieko steeled herself and spoke. Mother, have you not seen it? Seen TT the sisters, their eyes? And I said, I stammering. Aleda's stomach twisted, even as she made herself project her usual air of self-assurance. Rieko could not have seen it too. It had been her imagination, not. You will elaborate, daughter. She felt too sick to even comment on the woman's stutter. Sisters disappear for a few days or a week, and then when they reappear, they're different. Changed. Since Cadswain made her declaration, it has been happening. So many sisters, they come back the same, but like you're talking to someone, she shuddered. Something else behind their eyes. Aleda grimaced as she remembered that declaration. Cadswain had said she was mad or a dark friend. Then she had been furious. Now she wondered, was that so far from the truth? And now you have come to me. I take it you did not believe her. She wanted to say slander, but suddenly found that she struggled to words. I stayed when the tower split, Mother. You are the Amulin seat. If you were a dark friend, I do not think we would still be having this conversation. Aleda raised her eyebrows. Rieko must be incredibly brave or incredibly desperate. Why did you not leave the tower? Others have been slipping away. Not any more, Mother. I know of at least one or two who tried and then changed their minds, returning a week or so later. Different. How far did it go? Alvarin was the same as ever, smug behind her smooth-faced mask. Did that mean she was safe to speak to, or was she Black Adger too, with no need to be turned? Aleda failed to suppress her shudder. You think 13 channelers and 13 ma? She could not make herself say it. Rieko looked like she wanted to vomit. Yes. How many are left? There was no point denying it anymore. How many can we save? I do not know, Mother. Of those that are unchanged, some must be voluntarily black, but surely not all. I think there are around 400 Aes Sedai in the tower. I do not know all of them, but based on what I have seen, my best guess is that somewhere between 100 and 150 remain as normal. How many of those are Black Adger I could not say. Aleda's mind was racing. 2 years ago, I would have ordered you to do penance for suggesting the black adger existed. A year ago, I would have said its numbers would be tiny. Now, I do not know. We cannot assume anyone is safe. It was clear. The black adger ruled the tower and had kept her as a figurehead. Light knew why. She was no dark friend. However, that meant Alvarin was almost certainly black. Who could she trust? Was there anybody? Rieko, she could trust her. She had to. If she could not, then everything was doomed anyway. But anybody else? Darkness closing in all around her. She needed to be strong. Rieko was clearly on the edge of despair. Eleda pulled herself together. She was the Amiel in seat. She might be an abject failure at it, but she would at least provide comfort to Rieko. Sit, Rieko. As long as we remain in the light, the tower is not lost. There were more Aes Sedai out of the tower, ones who had stayed neutral or fled with Siwan, considerably more than were in the tower. She also had her embassy to the dragon, almost 50 loyal and uncorrupted Aes Sedai. According to the pigeons, they were on their way back without any success. Unconsciously, she glanced down to her desk drawer. She had options. They had options. I am likely being watched. You will need to act as my hand until we are ready to strike. Take care, or you may become a target. You may be a target anyway. You will need to try to identify who might not yet have been turned and remains with the light. Then we will need to act discreetly to establish their true loyalties. Come back to me at the same time in 3 days, and we will discuss this further. Thank you, Mother. I will do as you say, Mother. Eleda hesitated and then opened her drawer and pulled out a brooch in the shape of a bee. Here, take this. It is an angriel, a strong one. Do not under any circumstances allow anyone to know you have it, but if they come for you, kill them and make your escape if you can. Do not sacrifice yourself for me, daughter. Eben lay back, enjoying the dim light of the warm evening, looking out over the river. Life's funny, isn't it? Not long ago, I was looking at life on a farm. If we'd met, you'd be trying to gentle me. Now we're both going to be Aes Sedai one day, and we're friends. He glanced over at Helena, where she lay beside him just in time to see her scowl. I wouldn't have. Of course you would have, and it would have been the right thing to do. Taija and Rand Sedai changed the world, and it's better for it. I suppose. Things have changed for me too. I've been accepted in the White Tower, wondering about when I'd be testing for the shawl. Now it feels like I've taken a step back in some ways. Just another initiate, but such a big step forward in others. The world's changed, and so have I, just another initiate. Eben played up his outrage. Just like me, you mean? Just like you, yes. It's horrifying. A huge step down. Oh, come on, I'm not that bad, or you wouldn't spend so much time with me. Their eyes met. All right, you're not that bad. I might even let you be my warder once I'm Aes Sedai. Your warder? Ha, you can be mine if you're lucky. Women aren't warders. You know that if you were properly educated. Well, your education told you men weren't Aes Sedai, and yet there was a pause, and then they both broke into giggles. The world really has changed. Maybe we'll be each other's warders. Eben realized they really were close to each other, looking straight into each other's eyes. If he just leant forward slightly, his lips met Helena's, and for a brief moment she froze. Then they were kissing, gently at first. It was the first time he'd kissed a girl. He suspected it was her first too, given the White Tower's rules. It was everything he'd imagined, everything he'd hoped for. Her lips were so soft, slightly open as they moved against his. Their noses bumped together and they broke apart, looking awkwardly at each other. She looked conflicted. Had he done something wrong? He drew back slightly, opened his mouth to apologize. Before he had time to say anything, Helena grabbed him and pulled him back to her, and there was no need to think any more. Eben wasn't sure how long they'd been kissing. He'd been so lost in the moment. He'd even been brave enough to put his hands on her, pulling her clothes and running them up and down her back. It all came to a sudden, crashing stop when he heard someone clearing their throat above them. Helena leapt away from him, almost jumping to her feet to immediately sink into a deep curtsy. It took Eben slightly longer to realize who it was, but when he did, he was up almost as fast, his face heating. He glanced at Helena, who was blushing even harder than he was, and quickly bowed low to Taija Sedai, as he'd learnt was appropriate for an apology. Taija Sedai, we were just... Helena clamped her jaw shut when Taija Sedai held up a hand. Yes, I think it was clear what you were doing. Perhaps next time choose somewhere a little more private. Eben winced, and then his mind caught up with what she'd said. She didn't sound particularly annoyed. Were they not in trouble? She was turning to leave. He was about to slump with relief when she suddenly turned back to them, a look in her eye that made his heart sink. Tell me, Helena, do they teach you the contraception web in the White Tower? The what, Taija Sedai? Helena sounded as confused as he felt. Contraception, She went a little cross-eyed as she thought. If he wasn't so in awe of her, it would be cute. How to not have babies after sex? He felt his cheeks flushing even redder. We were just. It's fine, I don't care what you do, you're both adults, but I don't want any unexpected pregnancies, not now. You do know how that works, right? This time she also glanced at Eben. Ah yes, it was explained at the tower. Good. Would you like me to explain for you, Eben? Frantically, he shook his head. No, Taija, said I. Thank you. I grew up on a farm. I know how it works. Excellent, so the contraception web. This is how it's done. You lay it down just here. Taija said. I pointed, and he immediately looked away, mortified. Now show me in the air. Eben felt goose pimples erupt over him as Helena channeled, or so he assumed. Not quite. It's a fairly harmless web to get wrong. It was developed so you could use it even when you were drunk, but it's more like this. Was she really teaching Helena that, right there in front of him? Yes, perfect. Now apply that to yourself each day and guaranteed no babies for at least 24 hours. All clear. Helena's almost inaudible, yes, Aes Sedai, was a stark contrast to Taija Sedai's cheerful, business-like tone. Excellent. Now don't let me catch you having sex out here. I don't mind what you get up to in private, but no one wants to see that. She hesitated. Well, I don't anyway. Have a nice night. Good night, Taija Sedai, they muttered as he bowed and Helena curtsied. The woman headed off into the darkness again. She seemed to be oddly pleased, but he couldn't work out why. It didn't matter, there were more pressing things to think about. Eben turned back to Helena, both of them still blushing furiously. I think it might be time to go to bed. We need to be up early in the morning. Yes, you're right, of course. He hesitated, silently cursing Taija Sedai for ruining the moment so thoroughly. But that was great. I'd like to kiss you again, if you'll allow it. Helena gave him a shy smile. So long as we find somewhere she won't bother us. Paddle stood out in the sun, his blue-fringed coat unbuttoned, watching the novices straining to seize Sedin. No, again. You need to empty your mind first. Feed everything into the flame, no emotion left at all. Hadn't been born to be a teacher, but here he was. A new lease of life since the dragon had cleansed the taint. He'd managed to learn to channel Sedin by himself, somehow survived almost 2 years with no more than small foibles to show for it. Apparently that was rare. Vanishingly so. Maybe that was why the Creator had allowed him to survive, so he could help these boys survive too. One of them, Aderin, managed to keep hold of Sedin this time, before slowly forming a weave of spirit in front of him. Well done, Aderin, good work. It was important to give both praise and criticism. Too much of one or the other and you would ruin a man. Thank you, Paddle, said I. Aderin gave him a small, pleased bow. Now try again. It was strange hearing someone call him Aes Sedai, even a month later. He had been a merchant before, a bloody good one too, but certainly not the kind of person who walked in the same circles as Aes Sedai. Yet now he was one, sort of. He smiled ruefully to himself, without taking his eyes off the boys. He hadn't missed the subtle slights some of the women gave him. Most of them didn't see him as a real Aes Sedai, but that was understandable. The taint had only been cleansed months ago. He hadn't paid his dues to the White Tower the way they had. What mattered was that Siwan Sanch, the Amulin seat, his Amulin seat, had given him a chance. The White Tower had stood against the shadow for 3,000 years. It was ready to welcome men back into its ranks now that the Lord Dragon had cleansed the taint, and the pattern had picked him out to help with that. She was a visionary, and because of her, he had been honored and given one of the most important tasks in history. That was part of the reason he had chosen the blue Aja that had been her Aja before she became Amulin. He would live up to that honor. The women could sneer behind his back, but he and his boys would prove themselves. It might take years, but before he was done, the men would be an integral part of the White Tower, as respected as any woman. So tell me, are you familiar with the kingdom of Manetheren and its history? Given the Queen's new prince consort, the historical context really is fascinating. Benny took a sip from her cup of wine to be matched by Tell. I can't say that I am. What was Manetheren? Is this something to do with her naming him Lord of the Two Rivers? Well, indeed. You see, Mantheren's geographical boundaries were. As Benny talked, she watched Tell carefully. A fascinating man, hugely knowledgeable about many things. It was such a pity he and poor Taija had ended up the way they were. They both loved so many of the same things, and instead of enjoying them together, they avoided each other. It had been interesting to discover that, for all his bonhomie and fun with the initiates, Tell was as lonely as his former betrothed. Of course he did not say it. The man was far less open than Taija. He would have made a good Aes Sedai even in this time, but it was obvious to anyone who spoke to him for long. Of course that made her task all the easier. He was a harder man than Taija, more closed off in many ways. Unsurprising, really, but he had come to welcome the time she spent with him. Once she had extended the hand of friendship to him, presented in the right way of course, he had taken it without much difficulty. Naturally, it was a delicate balancing act. It just would not do for Taija to find out what she was planning. Now that he was more relaxed around her, it was only a matter of time before he lowered his guard properly. It would be a slow process, but Benny would find out what kind of a person Tell Janin truly was. While Taija found happiness in herself, she would assess Tell. If, and given his history it was a very big if, she decided he was worthy of it, then Taija could be gently steered back to him. Cadsuane would be delighted, and the two of them could resume their relationship. However, if she found him wanting in any respect, well, it all depended. Most likely she would just leave him in place. He was a fascinating man after all, and doing good work for the light. Taija could be gently guided away from him, and perhaps introduced to a suitable man or two, someone with both muscles and a brain. No harm would be done, and Benny's own studies could be furthered with his knowledge too. If he was worse than she thought, though, well, he might be more paranoid than Taija, but he was not paranoid enough. Chapter 116. Wrestlers Ain't All That. Chapter text Chapter LXXXV Wrestlers Ain't All That. Taija was walking through the hall's grounds, lost in thought. In particular, she was thinking about the next step in the expansion of the hall. She hadn't done badly with just testing whoever turned up, but she thought it was time to take things further. She was going to need to start actively recruiting, traveling around looking for potential initiates. There was a risk to quality, but the last battle was coming, and she'd need every trained channeler she could get. The only question was how to find the time. Still, at least soon, some of the most advanced initiates would be able to spin gateways and help teach basic classes. Taija's musing was interrupted by the sound of laughter, annoying. However, after a moment, she decided to see what was happening. She was trying to enjoy herself more after all. As she headed towards the noise, it quickly became clear it was coming from the fighting grounds, where initiates practiced their various martial arts. There was a crowd of initiates gathered around the main ring. She thought Tell's advanced class should have been going on around then, but there were a lot more people than would be in his class. There were plenty of women there, for one thing. The watching initiates parted in front of Taija, so she had no trouble getting to the front. Tell was wrestling with one of the men, both topless and working to get grips. Suddenly Tell got his arms under his opponent's, linked his hands, and lifted the man before dropping him, landing on top of him with a thud. The man struggled for a few seconds until Tell tweaked his nose. That seemed to be the point he decided to give in. With a grin, they helped each other up, and with much slapping of backs and laughter, the defeated man headed to the side. Who's next? Tell's voice was cheerful. He was clearly having a lot of fun, as everyone else seemed to be too. Taija frowned and asked the initiate next to her, "What's going on?" The girl's eyes seemed to be fixed on Tell. His muscles really were glistening, and the way they moved when he really needed to wear more. It was clearly distracting the initiates. "Oh, Taija Sedai." She jumped and curtsied, one of the tower girls Taija realized. Someone asked Tell Sedai whether size could be overcome in a fight. So now he's fighting each of the initiates in his class in order of size. Okay, Taija realized the last one had been quite a big man, and then the next got up in a smooth movement. Yeah, she thought. He was huge, at least 2 meters tall, with the bright red hair that marked him out as one of young, dedicated men that had started to trickle in. With a grin, he stepped into the ring. "Let us dance, Tell Janin." Tell matched it with his own grin. "Let's go, yeah." They circled each other cautiously, the matted ground slick with sweat. Suddenly, Yer moved, diving forward for a tackle, but Tell sprawled onto him. There was a flurry of movement, and they were both back on their feet, circling again. Tell feinted to the left, and Yer almost slipped over on the sweat-damp surface, but kept his balance. They both laughed at that, and then suddenly they were up against each other, fighting for grips, trying to trip each other. It was a flurry of movement. Taija had seen enough of Tel's matches to know the basics, but all she could really say there was that they were both very good. Tel was better, unsurprisingly. He was a professional, but size mattered too. A moment later, Ye fell, and Tel landed on top of him. Again, there was a scramble for position until Tel somehow passed Ye's legs and ended up sitting on his chest before declaring victory with a loud whoop, his broad chest heaving from the exertion. A few seconds later, they were back up, hugging each other. Then Tel turned back to his audience, his defeated class behind him. Anyone else up for a go? No, nobody. None of the ladies. His grin was pure, relaxed fun. It was a pity that only a couple of the women had joined his classes. Testosterone fueled as they were, it would still be good for more of them to do it. One of the watching men called out, "I think they're all scared of you, Tel Sedai." It was nice, actually, that they were able to have that kind of banter. It was what being Aes Sedai should be like. Respect where it was appropriate, but relaxed respect where you could also be friendly. None of the haughty distance of the White Tower. If they're scared of me, then maybe an easier target for them. How about yeah? That got another burst of laughter at the idea of any of them wrestling the huge man. It was a bit disappointing, though. Still, it was nice that they could have their fun. How about Taija Sedai? One of the women called out. Taija looked round sharply, trying to work out who it was, but couldn't spot them. Tel immediately shook his head, directing a bow in Taija's direction. Taija Sedai has much more important things to do than wrestle with foolish initiates, or even foolish Aes Sedai. Taija nodded to herself at that. Still, though, he was having so much fun, just messing around. Why couldn't she be happy too? She kept asking herself that. Maybe she was the problem. Maybe she just needed to let herself have fun too. Back in her time, she'd have been out there being thrown around by Tel and loving every minute of it because she knew he wouldn't hurt her. Those happy times were gone, but maybe she could have fun too. Maybe. Taija's mind went back to something she'd thought of during the war, but never had the chance to try. It had been going to be a hilarious surprise for Tel, and then, well, then there were no more opportunities for fun. There hadn't been for a long time. Taija wanted to rebuild the hall. She needed to rebuild herself too. She didn't want to be the distant, respected but pitied, depressive leader of the hall. She wanted to be happy and have fun too. Before she could think better of it, Taija raised her voice. Tel Sedai's just scared I might hurt his student, but don't worry, I can be gentle. She started walking forward, shrugging off her coat as she went, a smile tugging at her lips despite her unhappy mood. Taija handed her coat to one of the initiates and reached down to slide off her boots and socks before stepping into the ring barefooted. She made a show of giving her shoulders a roll and then beckoned to Yer. "Well, come on then." He shook his head. "Taija," said I, "it would give me obligation, our size difference, our strength." Taija sighed. "All right then. If you're nervous." She glanced around. "Eben, how about you?" Eben grimaced. This was not at all what he wanted. Either he was going to risk hurting their leader. She really was much, much smaller than him, or he was going to end up humiliated because it would turn out she was secretly a highly skilled wrestler on top of everything else. He wasn't sure how comfortable he was getting that close to a woman either. Well, except Helena. It wasn't that he thought of Taija Sedai that way, but especially without her coat, he really could see the shape of her legs and hips under her trousers, and she wasn't that old. Or at least she didn't look it. Still, he knew better than to try to back out of this. The teasing would be good-natured, but it would just go on and on, damned if he did and damned if he didn't. With a sigh, he got up from where he'd been sat on the ground and pulled off his boots before stepping into the ring. "Just a second," Taija said. I winked at him, a faint smile on her face. His heart sank. He knew something bad was going to happen. She turned back to the audience. "Tel Sedai has been teaching some very useful skills to the initiates here, and I do recommend his classes. The man knows what he's doing, and it can be fun, which is important too." He wasn't sure he'd ever seen her doing something fun, but it was true that she was always encouraging the rest of them in it, and made sure that they didn't spend every waking minute working. However, Tel Sedai doesn't know everything there is to know about wrestling or fighting. I'm going to demonstrate. She paused, her smile widening. "You can also use this as a lesson. To prove that I'm not cheating, I want you to be practicing what you've been trained to detect unseen webs. Remember, fine threads of spirit. If you catch me channeling, then shout, and obviously I'll forfeit the match." Eben almost immediately felt the goosebumps that told him someone was channeling Sedar nearby. When Taija turned back to him, he gave her a nervous smile. He wouldn't say anything, he had his pride, but he knew this was going to be bad. "Don't worry, Eben, it'll be fun." He was fairly sure she'd spoken quietly enough that no one else heard. She raised her voice again. "Ready," he nodded. "Let's go." She bowed to him, politely respectful, and he returned it. Then nothing happened. Taija didn't move, just stood there smiling at him. Eben sighed. "Fine." He slowly advanced on her, reaching out to grab her. Now she moved, ambling or maybe stalking towards him, a look of intense concentration on her face. Might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb. Also, he knew Taija said I would be annoyed if he didn't at least try, and the last thing he wanted to do right now was to annoy her. Eben leapt forward, trying to tackle her, only to find himself flying as she batted away his arms and gave him a push, helping his momentum. He went tumbling out of the ring, landing in a heap. Light. How was such a small woman so strong? He gave his head a shake and then looked up to see her standing over him, offering him a hand. After a second he took it and she hauled him to his feet. She really was incredibly strong. She just pulled with one hand and he nearly left the ground. "Well done, Eben. Good job." She gave him a pat on the back and a gentle push back towards his classmates. "Now you've all been watching me like hawks. I was practically covered in people poking me with spirit during that. It was quite distracting. Did I cheat? Did anyone feel any flows from me?" There was a general shaking of heads from the audience. Well, that had been fun, but Taija felt a little bad for picking on Eben. He was a really nice kid, sweet and hard-working. No harm done, though. His reputation wasn't going to be hurt after this. So, who's next? "Yeah, do you think you might overcome your obligation and do me the honor?" Yeah looked at her blank-faced for a second and then laughed. "I shall not make the mistake of underestimating you," Taija said. I shall join you in the ring." As Yer stood, Taija couldn't help but catch Tell's eye. He was standing there, arms folded, an amused smile on his face. He knew something was up, but not what. Taija briefly broke into an excited grin before getting herself back under control. Once Yer was in the ring, they both bowed to each other, and then it was time to begin. He was more cautious, and yet more aggressive than Eben. No launching himself at Taija, instead it was constant feints, looking to grab her before she could properly react. He really was huge. He must have been at least twice Taija's body weight, if not more. She was still going to win, though, because she was cheating. It was hard, the focus and delicacy required. But Taija directed the paper thin flows of Sedar over her arms and legs and down to her hands again, conformed tightly against her body and actively under control to move while she did. She was confident that none of webs of spirit probing and poking at her would detect anything, not with the level of sensitivity they had. Tell might be able to, if he really tried, perhaps Nynaeve. She doubted anyone else that would have much hope. Suddenly Yer moved. Lighty was fast. Taija barely managed to intercept his arm, but when it hit her hand, she stopped him dead. Grabbing with the other hand, she pulled him onto her foot with inexorable strength. She wasn't tripping him with her foot, she was tripping him with the power melded against her foot. It was too easy. No one could stand up to that kind of inexorable pressure. He fell, pulling Taija down with him to land on top of him. He was instantly trying to rise, to push Taija off, but she got the palms of her hands on his chest, a web of air melded to them. He wasn't pushing against her strength, he was pushing against an immovable wall of the power, and he hadn't got a chance. After a moment he flopped back. "I yield." Taija climbed off him, and as with Eben, offered him a hand to help him up. A tiny application of the power, and she effortlessly hauled him to his feet. "Good job, yeah." She felt strange, different. After a moment she realized it was because she was grinning widely. When was the last time she'd done something silly like this? Not since her time. Tell had the reputation as the one who did ridiculous things for laughs, but that was just because she was more discreet. The two of them had been a terrible influence on each other. As Taija's thoughts went back to Tell, as they so often did, her grin faded. The moment ruined. Again. Time to get back to work, she supposed. Let them try to work out what she'd done. Maybe she'd tell them tomorrow. Only Tell had straightened up. He was coming towards the ring, a casual swagger to his step. "Well, that was impressive. Taija said I's secret techniques truly are powerful. I think she needs a real challenge, though." He struck a dramatic pose in front of the audience. "Oh, Light, he couldn't be doing this." "Nope." Taija shook her head. This isn't such a good idea. She started to back out of the ring, not wanting to meet Tell's eyes. Then someone from the audience called out, "Go on," Taija said. "I show him how it's done." She couldn't work out whose voice it was. Damn it. She couldn't even tell them off. Why were they saying her name? There was a swelling chant. Taija, Taija, Taija. Taija stopped moving back. Benny had told her to have fun. The initiates were showing frightening disrespect, but they were telling her to have fun too. Fine, she was going to have fun. Taija held up a hand and the chant dies away. All right then, let's show Tell Sedai how it's done. She stuck her hand out and beckoned him forward casually. Whenever you're ready. Taija felt the probing webs of spirit descending on her again. It must have been driving some of them mad trying to work out how she was doing this. Tell rolled his shoulders and then ambled towards her, deliberately overconfident and casual, making a show of it. Taija knew he was going to lunge forward and try to grab her about. Now. She moved, grabbing for him and feeding power through the paper-thin webs of air over her skin. With one smooth movement, Taija picked him up and flung him across the ring. Tell landed in a diving roll and was on his feet almost as fast as the eye could follow. His movements became more wary, the professional athlete coming to the fore, although he must have been a bit out of practice after so many years. Despite his caution, there was a growing smile on his face. It was infectious. Taija felt her own forming. She had plans. She'd been wanting to try this for a long time, oh yes. This time he was careful, trying to get grips on her without overcommitting. Good. Now watch, everybody. You're minding your own business. Walking down the street when a champion wrestler attacks you. International Grappling Association, World Wrestling Championships, whatever, doesn't really matter. Tell looked mildly offended for a second. Obviously, he knew she was cheating, although Taija was fairly sure he still hadn't worked out how. As it was, he was playing right into her hands. Literally. Taija let him come close, ready to block his attempt at grabbing her. Then he moved. Light, he was fast. Even expecting it, she almost missed, but she managed to close her hand over his wrist. Not that she could get it all the way round, but it was enough. She could hold anything in her grip now. Wrong. Tell tried to grab with the other hand, and Taija just managed to get his other wrist. Wrong again. Tell struggled to pull his arms free, but her grip was unbreakable, possibly literally. Taija met his eyes, and her smile widened even as consternation started to erase his. Now I'm in control. This is where I strike. Before he had time to look scared, Taija gave him a heave, straight up. He went airborne with a yell of surprise, flying up above her head before he landed on her hands, held up above her head, with a meaty thump. Instantly, he was trying to grab at Taija's arms, but they might as well have been iron bars as she held him straight above her head. This is why it's important to work out. A healthy body begets a healthy mind. Taija couldn't quite stifle a giggle as she spun him round over her head. This was difficult, very difficult. She doubted she could do it if he was really fighting back hard, let alone if he was channeling too. In an actual combat situation, it would be completely impossible given how careful and subtle she was having to be with the webs, controlling them perfectly to keep them against her skin. Tell started laughing as she spun him, uncontrolled guffaws, and that seemed to be the cue for the crowd of initiates to decide that they were allowed to laugh too. Taija really wanted to grab him by the ankles and dip him up and down head first, but she just wasn't tall enough. Frustrating. But you know, good as the workout is, this is meant to be a fighting class. Taija suddenly dropped Tell, catching him just before he reached the ground and making sure he didn't hit it too hard before throwing herself on top of him in a mount. And now he's pinned, unable to escape, and at my mercy. Taija couldn't control her giggles at that point. He tried to buck her off, laughing as he did it, bridging with his hips and looking to grab her, but Taija just casually batted his hands away, pinning them to the ground. That made her look down at him, see the happy smile on his face, mirrored by her grin. His face was flushed red, matching the heat in hers. Their eyes meet, and suddenly it was all back, thrust at Taija, reminding her of everything. This wasn't the past. Everything wasn't okay. Her smile vanished, and she couldn't get off him fast enough. She needed to go. She needed to get out of there. What had she been thinking? She couldn't just run off. Everyone was watching. Taija glanced back at him, tension thrumming through her. Thank you, Tell, for helping me with my demonstration. Now, the first person to work out how I did that will get a reward. There, that turned it into a teaching moment rather than a loss of control. She'd have to think of something if anyone did work it out. Right, We're all very busy. Back to work, everyone." Taija turned and headed for the room she used as an office, quickening her pace, not meeting anyone's eye. It wasn't far to her office, only a minute or two, and then she could shut the door, spin a web against eavesdropping, and find a corner. As soon as Taija was in, she sank to the floor, pulling her knees up to her chest, and let the tears flow. How could she have been so stupid? Why did she listen to Benny? It felt like she just reopened every wound, slapped herself in the face with how things could have been, how they should have been. This wasn't making her happy. It was just reminding her of what she'd lost, while she embarrassed herself in front of everybody. Taija didn't hear the door open, or anyone coming in, nothing until he crossed the line of her web. When he did, she looked up through blurry eyes to see him standing over her, sorrow in his eyes. "Go away, TL." Taija put her head back in her arms until she heard a sliding thump and looked up again. He'd sat himself down on the floor next to her, leaning against the wall, a distant look in his eyes. "We really are a mess, aren't we? You seem to be doing all right." Taija immediately regretted her words. Tell looked at her with his sad, blue eyes. "Come on, you know that's not true. You know me well enough." After a moment, Taija nodded and looked back down. It was true, he could plaster it over better than her, but she still saw it in his eyes. "We can't keep going on like this." He pulled his legs up to his chest, too, in unconscious imitation of her own position. "I know," Taija stifled a sob, "but we have to do this. We can't just walk away. Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her arms again, her shoulders heaving. "Just leave me alone, Tell, I'll be fine." She heard movement. Maybe he'd leave her to cry in peace. Then an arm wrapped round her, gently pulling her against him. For a second, Taija resisted, and then she gave in and buried her face in his chest. It was better than her arms anyway, and at least he put a shirt on. "I can't stop thinking about everything about us. I just want it back how it was, but it can never come back. You killed it, and I want to hate you for it. I know I should hate you for it, but I can't, not really, and if you hadn't done what you did, you'd be dead, and I'd still be alone, and just now it was so much fun, and maybe the happiest I've been since our time, and then I remembered, and I can't have it back." He was gently stroking her head. "And I miss you, and I'm so lonely, and I just want you back, but I can't because it's gone." By then she was clinging on to him, his broad chest like a life raft amidst the turmoil of her emotions. "I'm sorry. I know. It'll be okay," he murmured as Taija half-ranted, half-rambled into his chest. "I wish it had never happened. Wish I'd not done what I did. Every minute of the rest of my life. But most of all, I wish I'd never lost you." She managed to get herself under control enough to pull away slightly and look up to his eyes. It must look a complete mess, puffy eyes, tear-stained cheeks. Taija realized after a moment that he didn't look much better. She should let go, push herself away. Instead, she found herself giving him a weak smile. "I'm sorry, Tell. I shouldn't have," she gestured vaguely. His shirt was wet from her tears. His arms were still round her. She should make him move them. Really, she should. "We can never go back to what we had, I know. It's my fault." There was so much pain in his voice, but something else. "But the hall ran school, the Aes Sedai. There's something worthwhile that we can rebuild from our own time. Maybe they don't need to be the only thing. Things can never go back to how they were, but maybe we can start over, build something new." Benny did tell her to look for happiness. Maybe she was right. Maybe this had been inevitable ever since Tell gave her Lanfear's head. Did it matter? The real question was it what she wanted? Maybe it was selfish, given everything he'd done, but the answer was still yes. Taija gave Tell a weak smile and tried to sniff the snot back up her nose. "Tell Janin, are you asking me out?" After a long moment he replied, "Yes, I suppose I am." Okay, okay, let's try." Tentatively, she leant back into him, and his arms tightened around her. Chapter 117. Interlude XXX. Aes Sedai Shenanigans. Chapter text interlude XXX. Aes Sedai Shenanigans. Egwene watched as Eben spoke to the group of Saldeans, enthusiastically gesturing at the walls beside them. Really, she was meant to be in charge this time. Well, she was in charge, but Taija had also told her about management, the importance of letting people grow under you, and that was what she was doing now. It didn't hurt that he really was quite sweet when he got going too. He couldn't be as old as he said he was. She just didn't believe it. After a bit more discussion, there was a series of nods and bows, and then he glanced over to her. She gave him a smile and nodded. He'd done well. She couldn't tell when he seized Sedin, no more than he could when she embraced Sedar given the inverted web she had over herself. If it worked for Taija, why not for her too? Still, everyone could see the effects when the two of them put their hands on the walls of the watch tower. Stones melded together, seams and cracks disappearing. A catapult stone would bounce off these walls by the time they were done. Eben really was growing as a channeler, and his dedication to the Hall's ideals was clear. Maybe she'd have a word with Taija when they were back. Aleda was waiting, drumming her fingernails on the desk. Where was Rieko? Was she still alive? Had she made a mistake in trusting her? Did she have any choice? It was getting harder and harder to keep things together. She had gone to the hall today to lead the sitters. Those curtsies with dead eyes above them, watching her, smirking at her, was every single sitter gone. Even the ones who seemed normal were laughing at her behind their masks. She was sure of it. How long would it be before they came for her? She couldn't escape. They would be watching for that. Also, she was the Amulin's seat. She had a duty to the tower. She could not simply abandon that. She could not help her sigh of relief when the tentative knock came at her door. Soon Rieko was inside, the door safely closed behind her and a weave surrounding the room to keep out any listeners. "What have you found, daughter?" "It is as bad as I had thought. The sisters, so many." Rieko looked like she might burst into tears. "Be strong, daughter. While we are free there is hope." Aleda resisted the urge to sneer. This situation was more than any Aes Sedai could have expected to face. Her words had an effect, thankfully. The woman gathered herself and continued her report. "I've identified a few sisters that I think may be loyal. I cannot be sure, though, they might be black. What I have done is look for the sisters who have not been turned. Then among those I look for the ones who look worried or nervous underneath their composure. The blacks must surely have little cause for worry now." "How many?" "Not many, mother, not many at all." She would not give in to despair. She was Aes Sedai. She was the Amulin's seat, for what little that was worth now. "How many do you think?" "Perhaps 50 at most." Aleda felt sick to her stomach. "Very well, we're going to have to take extreme measures." The tower was lost, that much was clear, but she needed to give hope to Rieko. "We need to identify who is safe and who is not. The blacks must have some means of subverting the 3 oaths, I assume with the oath rod. With that, we could check the loyalty of any sisters that remain. Renosa will be tested for the shawl soon, perhaps then." She trailed off into thought. "You would take it then?" "Leave that to me, daughter. We also need weapons. Look into the Angreal and Sangreal. How are they guarded? By whom? Is there any chance we could take them?" She hesitated. "But be careful, if you are caught." They both shuddered. You seem cheerful today, Tell." He really did. Benny had been fairly sure that his good cheer was something of a facade painted over light knew what underneath, but today she could detect no sign of that. Perhaps it was that wrestling event she had heard about. The kind of foolish fun young men enjoyed. But by all accounts, Taija had played some sort of joke on everyone, and if it had cheered her up then, all the better. Eben knelt nervously in front of the gigantic red banner, the sinuously divided circle in its center. He was wearing his formal, unadorned black coat, like the crowd of initiates behind him. Taija Sedai, Tel Sedai, and Egwene Sedai stood in front of him, also wearing formal black, but with the badge of the Aes Sedai on their chests, watching with solemn faces. "I swear to follow the ideals of the Hall of Servants, now and forever. I shall conduct myself as a servant of all. I shall help those that are in need. I shall inflict no cruelty on others, and I shall always remember my role is to make the world a better place." He was proud that he managed not to stumble over the words in the old tongue, despite the way his whole body wanted to shake. Taija Sedai stepped forward and pulled a plain red patch from her pocket. "Rise Eben Harpwell." It floated over to him on flows of Sedar. He couldn't help but follow it with eager eyes. "We welcome you as an aspirant to the Hall of Servants. You have completed the first step on the road to becoming Aes Sedai. Stand." Felt a slight pressure, and the patch was there, stuck onto the left breast of his long black coat, a cover for his heart as it swelled with pride. Eben stood, and Tel and Egwene Sedai both came forward and clasped his hand. "Welcome." Finally, Taija Sedai took his hand in both of hers. "Well done, Eben. You make us all proud. The reward will be more work, but for today you're free. Enjoy it." She lowered her voice and leant in slightly. "Helena can have the day off, too." Did she just wink? Surely not. He wasn't sure, and she'd already turned away to chivvy everyone to their classes. Still, he had a free day, and so did Helena. He was strong enough to spin a gateway now, and he had ideas for what to do with the glorious summer weather. Verin spared a glance at Alana as she rode beside her towards this new hall of servants. It seemed that Moiraine and Cadsuane had access to the dragon largely sewn up, so there was little point in spending more time in Keemlin. She had little interest in going to join Siu and Sanch, and the White Tower did not seem like a convivial place for anyone at the moment, so that left the hall as the most interesting place to be, for now at least. It would keep them close to the centers of power, allow them to see what was going on and exert influence, and perhaps take action if the opportunity arose. It was hard to believe that it had only been there for less than a year. Already numerous buildings filled the space, their construction plain, but high quality and the number of novices. No, they called them initiates here. It made her wonder how far the White Tower had fallen. Yes, it would certainly be interesting being here. Perhaps it could even distract Alana from the misery she had been in since poor Ifan had died. Paddle gave a low bow. Mother, I've heard about the planned visit to the Hall of Servants. May I accompany you? Siwyn gave him a long, slow look. Son, why would you wish to do that? Are you not already fully occupied with your novices? Half the sitters would have conniptions if he came. They would expect him to defect within minutes. I'll of course obey your commands, Mother, but I believe my presence will be useful. You've declared that the tower has changed. What better way to show it than with my presence? From what you've told me of this Taija, she'll be more impressed by you following through on those words. You said she is a naive idealist. Well, show her that you're living those ideals. It can't hurt with negotiations. Siwyn looked him over. Your arguments have some merit. If he did defect, she was finished. The first Amulin to be deposed twice, but he did have a point. He gave her a sharp look. A sharper look than a proper Aes Sedai would have been willing to give her. You're worried that I'll go over to them, aren't you? He frowned for a second, and then before she could say anything got on one knee. By the light, and my hope of salvation and rebirth, I swear that I am loyal to the White Tower. He looked up at her. Does that convince you, Mother? She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but fervent devotion. She had thought her plans were in ruins when Taija had rejected her offer, but it seemed the pattern did still have a place for her. Matt stepped out of the gateway into a home he'd long left behind. Not that he had any regrets about that. He was born for cities, and cities were where he would stay. Nynaeve and Alexei were already heading off to the Winespring Inn to start hawking for people to come and join the hall. More fool them. Why anyone would want to become a flaming Aes Sedai he didn't know. He could, grudgingly, admit that the hall was hardly as bad as the White Tower, but still, bloody fools all of them. Come on, Elaine, this way. He turned towards his home. If they were lucky, they could be back in Keemlin before Nynaeve harangued the villagers into a riot. Hopefully Alexei would keep things calm. The man had a decent head on his shoulders, particularly for an Aes Sedai. He glanced at Elaine. She had her royal face on, the one that she wore when she was nervous. Well, she couldn't be as uncomfortable as he'd been when he was forced to meet her mother. Far too many bloody nobles. If he could put up with that, then she could certainly manage to meet his parents. Don't worry, they won't bite. He smiled reassuringly at her and led her on, trying not to wince at how rural the place looked compared to Keemlin. You could practically fit the whole village into the royal palace. Well before Taija had finished with it anyway. It didn't take long for them to reach Matt's home. Well, not anymore, he supposed, but the place he grew up. Here we are. Burn him. If she was judging it, he would be annoyed. Flaming nobles. Come on, Matt. Elaine poked him in the ribs, jerking him out of his grumpy musing. I think you are more nervous than I am. I am not. After a long moment, he knocked on the door. There was the sound of someone moving inside, and then his mother opened it, hesitating and then gasping as she saw him. Hello, Ma. Matt, my boy, you're back. Abel, it's Matt. She grabbed his shoulders. Let me get a look at you. Oh, grown up so big and strong, I'm so happy. Where did you get this coat, though? You didn't steal it, did you? No, Ma, I didn't steal it. He'd known this would be a mistake. Why would he even think it would be a good idea? Oh, and who is this beautiful woman? Is she with you? You look like you are together. Are you together? Did you actually make an honest man out of my little bundle of mischief? Despite his best efforts, Matt could feel a blush coming up to his cheeks. Before he could say anything, Elaine stepped forward, as prim as she ever was. My name is Elaine Track, and pleased to meet you, Mistress Cawthon. Matt has told me so much about you. That wasn't at all true. He hardly ever spoke about home. Oh, how lovely to meet you, Mistress Track, and please do come in. Matt winced, expecting an explosion from Elaine, but none came. She just smiled and said, "Why, thank you, but please call me Elaine. Abel must be with the horses. I'll send one of the girls to fetch him, but come in, come in." His mother ushered them in and towards the rough wooden table in the kitchen. "Have a seat, let me get you some tea." She must have been pleased to see them. Tea wasn't cheap. It was always reserved for special guests. Elaine primly perched herself on one of the chairs and Matt sprawled in the one next to her. "So, where are you from, Elaine?" "Keemlin, but we met in Falmy." "Falmy? Where's that then?" Trackand. Isn't that the same name as Queen Morgase? What a coincidence." Matt winced. He couldn't help himself, and of course his mother noticed. Anything else would have been too much to hope for. "Matt, why, oh Light, you do look like her. Perrin's lady you're not, are you?" Elaine smiled sweetly. "Oh Light, the house is a mess. I'm so embarrassed. Matt, how could you bring her here without warning me? Mistress Cawthon, it is fine. Please, your home is lovely." His mother hesitated and looked at Elaine. Lady Trackand, I have to ask." She glanced at Matt. "I love my boy, but why?" Elaine glanced at him and then started giggling. This had been one of the worst mistakes of his life. Up there, with not diving through the window of the inn when Taija had turned up drunk off her face. Noryun formed the flame and void in his head again, feeding all of his emotions into it. The light of Sedin came to him this time. It didn't always. Pulling it through him, he shaped it into flows of air, reaching out to grasp the pebble sat before him, only for the flows to fade to nothing as Sedin slipped out of his grasp. His heart sank as Tame looked over at him, his usual sardonic expression deepening towards contempt. "Did I not tell you to hold Sedin tight, man? You have to seize it and hold it, not gently encourage it. You're not some slip of a girl trying to embrace Sedar." Tame's sharp voice cut through his own despair. "If you won't even try, then what's the point of you being here wasting my time?" Noryun shrunk in around himself under the hook-nosed man's glare. "I'm sorry," Tame said. "I'll try harder." He was trying as hard as he could. He just didn't know what he was doing. "I'm no Aes Sedai. Just Tame will do." That seemed to have annoyed Tame even more. Could he do nothing right? "Now do it again, and try not to make such a mess of it this time." Trying not to let his bottom lip tremble, Noryun formed the flame and the void once more. He was going to manage this. He was. By the end of the class, Noryun felt as fat and useless as he ever had. He'd tried. He always tried as hard as he could, but he could only properly control the flows one time in 3. At best, the other new initiates were already comfortably overtaking him. Dismissed. Tame looked away from the class, and Noryun hauled himself to his feet, ready to trail out after the others. "Not you, Noryun." His stomach twisted. What fresh humiliation was Tame going to visit on him now? He gave Tame a polite bow and looked at the floor, clutching his hands together. What would Macy have said if she could see him now? Trembling in front of one of the worst false dragons ever, dreaming of being Aes Sedai. As if that would ever happen. Tame looked him over, silently for a moment, his face saying he wasn't impressed by what he saw. Then he sighed, and some of the rigidity seemed to drain out of him. "Noryun, you are a frustrating man. I cannot have you failing my class. I'm trying, I promise you I'm trying as hard as I can." Tame's eyes seemed to penetrate deep into him. "Very well, sit. But the class is over and—" "Sit." Noryun sat. As soon as his buttocks hit the chair, Tame was looming over him. "You will try again. Form the flame, feed everything into it. There is nothing except the flame. Focus on it, flickering." He droned on and Noryun did his best, feeding his fear, his doubts, his worry into the flame. "Now, don't reach out to Sedin. Grab it, seize it. This is no beautiful woman to be seduced. It's a predator, a wild beast to be tamed. Fight it." Noryun reached and tried to grasp Sedin, but the light slid through his fingers. Again. Visualize the flame. Remember, you must seize Sedin by the scruff of the neck. Feed everything in. You're nothing without the flame. Hold it with a death grip. Empty yourself. If you let Sedin run free, you die. Everyone dies. You must dominate it. See the flame. Feel Sedin. Everything depends on your will, not letting go. Feel it. It is a wild beast, a predator, a flame that's hungry to burn everyone you love. Who do you love most? Picture them burning in the fire of Sedin if you let it slip even for an instant. Now see the flame, feel Sedin. Everything depends on your will. Do not let your loved one down. Now seize it. Noryuan grabbed Sedin, forcing it through him, riding its waves. It started to slip through his fingers again, and he clenched his teeth, forcing it back into line and shaping the web of air in front of him. His face bent into a snarl as he battled the power, but this time everything worked. The flows came together, and the pebble rose even as Sedin raged within him. After a moment, he lowered it to the ground and released the power. It took him a moment to realize he was panting for breath. Slowly, Noryuan looked up, surprising himself by meeting Tame's eyes. The man's lips twitched ever so slightly, and then he nodded sharply, the hint of a smile gone. There, now keep that in mind next time. He hesitated. Good work. With that, he spun on his heel and stalked out. Chapter 118. Finally, a stress-free existence. Chapter text, chapter LXXXVI. Finally, a stress-free existence. Taija felt like a weight had been taken off her shoulders. She still wasn't sure whether giving in and deciding to try again with Tel was the right idea. But frankly, she didn't care right then. Tel was. Well, he was Tel, and she just felt so much happier. So much less stressed since she'd stopped having to constantly worry about his very existence. Things were still awkward. How couldn't they be? But they were getting better. A couple of days after everything changed, they both took a day off from the hall, left Nynaeve in charge, Light helped the initiates, and told everyone they had a secret mission they needed to go on that required both their skills. Then Tel took Taija to Abu Dar for the day, and what a day. No worrying about anything, just walking through beautiful streets, admiring palaces, and eating delicious food. Enjoying the third age rather than frantically working to preserve it. They even used chopsticks to eat there. The whole city reminded Taija of Ma Ryu, actually, especially all of its canals with carefully carved stone bridges over them. There were still things neither of them were going to talk about, but that was fine. What mattered was that Taija didn't think about the war or work for a whole day. She even managed to persuade Tel to sneak into the main hall of the royal palace with her, disguised as a pair of guards. Too dangerous, he'd protested. As if she'd wanted to see its frescoes, and they'd been worth it. Anyway, it would have been open to the public in their time. She had no time for overprivileged nobles hiding beautiful art and history from people in general, and her in particular. Should it really be this easy to leap back into things with Tel? Taija wasn't sure, and ultimately she didn't care. He'd done enough to show he could be trusted. Anything else was between her and him. There was a bit of a bounce in Taija's step as she made her way through the hall's grounds to teach a lesson on inverting webs. Taija looked Verin and this Alana over and gave them a friendly smile. Welcome, Verin. It's nice to see you again. Pleased to meet you, Alana. To what do I owe the pleasure of your visit? Verin gave her a vague smile of her own. She reminded Taija of Benny, actually, which instantly made her a little warier. Alana seemed the grumpier of the two. We found ourselves at a loose end after assisting Perrin and the two rivers, and well, we thought we could perhaps help with your efforts here. Alana is of the Green Adger and knows much of battle, and I am so very fascinated by your history. Green Adger, Taija snorted internally. She could probably teach some basic channeling usefully, though. Well, I'm glad to hear it. We welcome guests here at the Hall of Servants, and anything you can contribute would be gratefully accepted. Taija would have to keep an eye on them, of course. The open hand of friendship, but she was ready if they were going to try to stab her in the back. It was another thing to worry about, but those days the burden didn't seem so heavy. Eben was in a little huddle with his friends, Yer and Dama, trying to get their advice on his latest dilemma. Not that he expected Yer to have anything useful to say. He liked the Ailman, he really did, but he had the strangest ideas about relationships. So for the next free day I thought I'd take Helena somewhere new and exciting, but I'm not sure where. Before either of them could reply, a voice came from behind him. Abu Dar's quite nice, very hot though. He jumped before spinning to find Taija Sedai standing behind him. Light, how did she keep sneaking up on him like this? She must be half cat. He gave a quick bow, as did the others. Taija Sedai, and we were just talking about. Oh, I know, like I said, Abu Dar is nice, although make sure you don't get into any duels if you go. Anyway, don't let me bother you. She gave them all a smile and headed off into the evening gloom. She really had been in a very good mood for the last 2 weeks. It was odd. She was always nice, but recently she'd just been happy. Well, he hoped she kept on being happy. She certainly deserved it. Hopefully, he wouldn't have to punch anyone else for making such inappropriate suggestions about what was making her happy, though. As he'd suspected, and Egwene said I had confirmed, even aspirants could still be set to digging holes. Although being an aspirant apparently, he should have known better than to punch an initiate, and so only got a spoon to do it with. Jur stood in front of Taija, the plain red badge of an aspirant on his brown tunic. So, like I explained to Tel Sedai, I came up with this web so that me and Sora could know where we are and how we're feeling all the time. Especially with me going away on missions with the Lord Dragon. He looked very nervous, more than he should really. Taija caught Tel's eye and resisted the urge to exchange a smile with him. As soon as I'd made it, I knew I should check with Tel Sedai that it was safe to use. Taija gave him a reassuring smile. You did the right thing, Jur. Well done. All the safety lectures had clearly paid off, although he was a bit older than some of the students, so she'd expect him to be more sensible. Tell you've looked it over, is it safe? He paused for a second. Yes, I think so. I'm not as good as you with this sort of thing, but I think I'm good enough. It should just make it so they can feel each other, like if they were in a link, no harm to be done, and it should be possible to release it. Taija struggled to imagine why anyone would want something so intrusive, but that was their business. So, like the tower Aes Sedai warder Bond, Tell nodded. And there's no element of compulsion to it. No, I've triple-checked. All right, that was what was really important. Fine. Well done, Jur, I'm impressed. We're going to have a chat with Sora about this, just to make sure that she fully understands. Not that I doubt you, but we need to do things properly, and then you can go ahead. Taija would go and find Sora while Tell kept an eye on Jur. She was going to need to think of some more formal rules for this sort of thing, though. She couldn't say it was to her taste, but if people wanted to do it. Obviously, both needed to be adults. Informed consent, perhaps an interview with each to make sure they fully understood what they were getting into, and absolutely no compulsion. New bondings using the Aes Sedai version would be strictly forbidden for anyone who wished to remain part of the Hall. Existing ones from Tower Aes Sedai would just have to be tolerated. Taija watched Tell teaching one of his advanced combat classes. Since her little stunt, a few of the women had signed up too, which was good. Everyone seemed to be having fun, and Yer had taken on a sort of assistant instructor role, which Taija supposed made sense given his background and skills. Still, her eyes were repeatedly drawn back to Tell's glistening form. She still hadn't managed to get it into his head that he'd be distracting all the young women walking around topless like that. He really had kept in shape. While they'd been spending time together, talking openly, rebuilding their connection, just enjoying each other's company, she hadn't taken things beyond sitting in his arms, enjoying his presence. Anything more just felt weird. Tell lifted Yer up, muscles straining with the weight of the bigger man, and dropped him on the mats. Perhaps not that weird, though. Fuck it. It had been more than a year since she'd even touched a man like that. Taija was trying to focus on her own happiness. As the class ended, she caught Tell's eye. Tell, when you have a minute, she hesitated, and after you've had the chance to clean up, would you mind coming over to my office? There are a couple of issues I need to discuss with you. Half an hour later, she heard a knock at the door of your office. Come in. Tell stepped in, closing the door behind him. He gave her a smile, the happy smile that Taija liked to see on him, not a sad or nervous one. What's up? One of the initiates misbehaving. Taija got up from her desk. Something like that. He put a shirt on. It hid just enough to make things tantalizing. He'd washed, too. His hair was still damp. Her eyes drifted up from his hips, over his flat stomach to his broad chest. She glanced down at his forearms, covered in the light fuzz of his blonde hair, their toned form still bare with his sleeves rolled up, and then up to meet his deep blue eyes. He was looking a little confused as Taija advanced on him, but he could be quite slow sometimes. I've just been thinking about us. She spun a web against eavesdropping around her office, and then another one to hold the door closed. She was not going to be disturbed. About us, is everything okay? He sounded worried. Taija didn't reply. She was almost in his personal space, and he took a step back, looking nervous, almost panicked in fact. Do you want me to leave? He started to fall. For fuck's sake, Tell, just shut up. Taija reached up and grabbed a fistful of his shirt before pulling his head down to her. You seem to have been more cheerful recently, my dear. It is good to see. Benny smiled and took a sip of tea. Taija smiled back, feeling relaxed. I've just been trying to take your advice, focusing on my own happiness and taking more time for myself, and it's made everything seem so much better. Well, I am glad to hear that. You will have to tell me what you have been up to, but first I wanted to talk about the initiates from the tower. Taija heard a knock on her office door, and when she said, "Come in," to HRE mild surprise, it was Elaine. She'd been spending a lot of time away from the hall since she was raised to full Aes Sedai, mostly supporting her mother, which was fair enough. After some pleasantries, she got down to business. "Taija, I found something out that you and Rand are likely to be interested in." "Oh, really?" Taija leant forward. "Do tell." "Verin and Alana were in the Two Rivers with Perrin, as you know." Taija nodded. "Well, it seems they have a number of girls from their sequestered in an inn who think they are going to become novices at the White Tower, or more likely Siyuan's village, but I am not sure they know the difference." "Oh, that is interesting." Nynaeve would have an absolute fit if she found out they were there, particularly after all the men and women she and Alexei brought back from their own visit. "You haven't told Nynaeve?" Elaine shrugged, looking embarrassed for a second. "I wanted to speak to you first. Nynaeve would just go and bully them straight into the hall." That was almost certainly true. Obviously getting them would be good for the hall, but it might well cause problems with Siyuan and the village. "Ah, yes, I see your point." Matt groaned to himself as he sat through yet another interminable meeting. Why had he agreed to come to Eringil with Elaine? Of course she needed to go and make these visits to shore up her mother's rule and her own position as heir to the throne. That was obvious. If you didn't keep the nobles happy, especially in a border town like this one, you risked all kinds of problems. His problem, though, was why he was there. Just because she wanted his company, it didn't mean she actually needed him there. Yet there he was, dressed like a bloody noble and having to act like one too. He'd sneak out after the next meeting, have some fun, maybe find a game of dice, and then he'd be back in time for supper. She wouldn't be too annoyed. Probably. Eben followed a step behind the two Aes Sedai. Rand Sedai, or the Lord Dragon, he was never sure which to call him, and Beni Sedai took the lead, with the initiates and him, the sole aspirant behind them. Today they were in Kerhian, the Lord Dragon's fifth visit. Taija and Tel Sedai had decided after the third that it was safe enough to send initiates, and he expected that he would be helping with some construction work later. For now, though, it would be boring speeches and discussions between the Aes Sedai and nobles. He glanced at the initiates, all considered responsible enough to come for the learning experience. It was funny to think that he was the most senior when Noryuan was well into his middle years. One of the Kerhianin lords was droning on about something dull, but he made himself listen. Beni Sedai always said that if you listened you could learn far more than people expected, that there would be nuggets of useful information beneath the boring pleasantries. The flow of words was stopped shortly afterwards by Beni Sedai's surprised exclamation. "Galena, I did not expect to see you here." "Beni, what a pleasant surprise." His eyes were drawn to a woman in a red dress, her face marked with the agelessness of the tower Aes Sedai, just like Benny's. She didn't sound like she meant it. A moment later, goosebumps popped up over his skin. Someone was holding Sedar. He did the only thing he could think of and seized Sedin, the world sharpening around him as he did. Chapter 119, Elada Strikes Back. Chapter text chapter LXXXV. Elada strikes back the White Tower, under the light, and by my hope of salvation and rebirth, I vow that I will never use my position or power as a weapon except against Shadowspawn, or in the last extreme of defending my life, or that of my bondmate, or another Aes Sedai. Elada took the oath rod from Renosa. "It is half done, and the White Tower is graven on your bones. Rise now, Aes Sedai, and choose your Aja, and all will be done that may be done under the light." She helped her to her feet. As the girl announced that she wished to join the green Aja, and all eyes were on her, Elada placed her own replacement for the oath rod on the gilded pillow beside her. She would need to move fast now, though. The false oath rod that she and Rieko had created might pass muster for a small time. However, assuming that the Black Aja were in fact using it, sooner or later they would discover that it had been substituted. "Welcome home, sister. We have waited long for you." She had thought about using an illusion, but in hindsight Rieko had been correct. With the materials and resources available in the tower and the use of the One Power, It had been simpler to essentially build their own facsimile, although of course theirs was no Turangreal. Renosa's eyes had been normal, excited, and nervous, no sign of the evil that infected so many. Did that mean she was innocent, or that she was already a dark friend? Elada did not know, and it made her feel sick knowing that if the girl was no dark friend, there was nothing she could do to save her. The Hall of Servants Tell raised his voice as he addressed the class. All right, well done, everyone. Now, we're going to be practicing slicing a woman's webs. Helena has kindly volunteered to provide the Sedar for this class, so please do be grateful to her. It's never much fun having your webs cut. When the hall had first been set up, he'd been stunned by how lucky he had been, that he could find something where he could contribute and actually enjoy himself, despite everything. Now, they used to say that good things sometimes happen to bad people. That couldn't be more true in his case. He deserved none of this, and yet here he was. It was like seeing the world in full color again. He hadn't even realized how gray everything had felt until after he could see again. He didn't deserve this, none of it. He hadn't even dared to dream that Taija might look at him again, but she had. He'd woken up next to her this morning. Another thing he neither deserved nor expected, but once she decided, she wanted something woe betide anyone who got in her way. Most people never got a second chance, whether they deserved it or not. He might not deserve his, but he would make sure that no one ever regretted giving it to him. One of the initiates let out a squawk, as Helena slipped a web past his defenses, and he felt a grin stealing its way across his face. One he truly felt, which hadn't been the case for a very long time. Kerhian, one of the Kerhian lords, was droning on about something dull, but Eben made himself listen. Aes Sedai always said that if you listened you could learn far more than people expected, that there would be nuggets of useful information beneath the boring pleasantries. The flow of words was stopped shortly afterwards by Aes Sedai's surprised exclamation. Galena, I did not expect to see you here. Benny, what a pleasant surprise. Eben's eyes were drawn to a woman in a red dress, her face marked with the agelessness of the tower Aes Sedai, just like Benny's. She didn't sound like she meant it. A moment later, goosebumps popped up over his skin. Someone was holding Sedar. He did the only thing he could think of and seized Sedin, the world sharpening around him as he did. For a second nothing happened, everyone stood there. This Galena and the mass of Kerhianin all looking unsurprised, contrasting with the worried looks on his party's faces. Then Rand Sedai broke the silence, his body quivering with tension, hand frozen halfway to his sword. I'm shielded. Eben's eyes snapped to Galena. She had a growing smirk on her face. Benny's eyes were on her too. How many tower Aes Sedai were there in the throng of Kerhianin nobles? The other initiates were stunned, confusion painted across their faces. He had to act. Taija Sedai's lessons came into his head. He could almost visualize her there in front of him. She never looked or sounded vague when she was lecturing. If you're dealing with a link, strike hard and fast. They'll overwhelm you if you stay still. Be flexible, identify the leader, and kill them first. Before he had time to think it through, he'd made a decision, spinning Sedin. Earth, fire, water, straight at this Galena. She exploded. There was no warning. 1 second she was there, the next a spray of blood and viscera showered the people around her. Eben tried to push down on the panic bubbling inside him. He just killed someone, just like that. He hadn't thought it would look like that. He wanted to be sick. She'd been there, and now she wasn't. A person, just blood and guts, and he'd done it. He didn't even know if she'd done anything. He was going to be sick, he was. Sedin fled him, and he bent double, emptying his stomach onto the marble floor. The moment Galena exploded, Rand felt the shield and barns of air vanish. He was already moving, drawing his sword and diving into the crowd. If he stayed still, he'd be caught. There. He spun fire, and an ageless face disappeared into flames. He sliced webs as they came towards him, dancing through the Kerhianin. He had Aes Sedai to hunt. A nobleman went for his sword, and Rand opened his throat with a flick. Something battered at his connection to Sedin, and he sliced it before turning an Aes Sedai into mush in a fist of air. Get them out of here, back to the hall. He yelled as loudly as he could at Eben. A pair of warders, because that was all they could be with the way they moved, advanced on him, swords drawn. He deflected a blow, pivoted, and sliced them in half with a web of air. He couldn't fight like this. He was hemmed in, fighting with one hand behind his back, not unless he was willing to wipe out half the noble houses in Kerhian. Eben could travel. He could get the initiates out. Nobody would touch Benny. He was the target, so if he could draw their attention away and then escape, it would be fine. He'd move out. With several Aes Sedai already dead, there probably wouldn't be enough to stop him now that he was fighting. Go, Eben. He lashed out with the power, earth and fire ripping a hole in the wall. Another ageless face threw a fireball. He sent her tumbling into the crowd, a bag of broken bones. Then he was through the hole he'd made and into the corridor, turning to face back into the room. Walking slowly backwards, away from the hole, he spotted a pair of Aes Sedai through it and sent a bar of fire carving straight through them. There'd be 13, but he and Eben had killed 6 between them. 7 would not be able to stop him. He would hold here until Eben got the initiates out, and then he would follow. If Benny didn't go with Eben, they could come back for her with overwhelming force, assuming she wanted to come, assuming she wasn't part of this. A web came through the gap, horrendously powerful. With a thought he sliced it. Where were the Aes Sedai in there? There must be another circle with that much strength. Had they brought 26? How hadn't he heard about this? Had the Kerhianin set him up? He couldn't just blast indiscriminately, not with the initiates and civilians in there. A huge fireball came at him, blowing the hole wider as it passed. He snuffed it out with a thought. Was that an Aes Sedai? He spun bolts of lightning, sending high-voltage electricity ripping through her. How many of these women were there? 2 full circles. Suddenly something crashed into his connection with Sedin, beating through it with inexorable force. He lashed out with spirit and fire to cut the web and hit nothing. No, where? Behind. He whirled to face more ageless faces, set into grim determination. Too many, too many. He threw himself forward if he could just get at them with his sword. The air turned solid around him, holding him in place. Eben heard Rand Sedai's shout and pulled himself together, straightening up. He didn't have time for regrets. He needed to get the others out of here. They weren't trained for this kind of fight. He seized Sedin again and started to spin a gateway. It was slow, too slow, right at the limit of his ability, but it started to form. Yer stood beside him, indecision on his face. Didn't the Ale have some sort of hang-up around the Aes Sedai? Behind him, a group of Ale maidens burst into the room, their spears already bloody, leaping into action against the Kerhianin. The web started to come together. He was spinning as fast as he could, and then, without warning, it fizzled in a bright shower of sparks. Wards. A moment later, a shield slammed into him, easily cutting him off from the power. He frantically looked around to see yet another group of ageless-faced women had come in through the main doors, the maidens frozen in air or lying dead on the ground. Sedin winked out from Yer and Noryuan too. Then the women that had come with them gasped. They were all caught, trussed up in spirit and air like birds for the part. As a hard-faced man patted him down roughly, the only thought that comforted him was that at least Rand Sedai and managed to get away. He would bring help, or just kill them all himself. Benny winced internally as young Rand was dragged back into the audience chamber. How many Aes Sedai had that fool woman sent here? Was she mad? There must be at least 40 of them. The only comfort was that, based on the faces she saw, they had all left the tower well before the turning started. She glanced around. Technically she was not a prisoner, but she was well aware of how fine a distinction that might be. Sedar blazed around all of the Aes Sedai in the room. The living ones anyway. Shields were held on the initiates and Rand. She had restrained herself, of course. She had no desire to end up as collateral damage during the brief but bloody battle. However, now, after a moment's thought, she embraced Sedar too. That got her a sharp look from Nesyun. You will release the power, Benny, until we have established your involvement with this travesty. You are walking on thin ice. Of course, Nesyun, my apologies, I will release it. As she spoke, she sketched the start of a curtsy, and achingly slowly wove an inverted web to conceal whether she was holding the power around herself before tying it off. Taija did have the most wonderful tricks. If only they were not so hard to do at any speed. With the weave in place, she released the power, as she had said she would, and then promptly embraced it again, invisibly this time. The oaths could be such a flimsy shield. She would watch, and she would wait. Chapter 120. The Creator has turned his eyes from you. Chapter text, chapter LXXXVI. The Creator has turned his eyes from you. Eben staggered forward as someone gave him a hard shove. It was a struggle not to fall when he couldn't see through the blindfold that had been placed on him. Unyielding hands found his shoulders, and then a firm kick to the back of his legs sent him painfully down to his knees on the cold marble floor. A moment later, the blindfold was pulled off him, revealing a number of stone-faced Aes Sedai. Glancing to his side, he saw Noryuan, Yer, Doriad, and Arena kneeling in line with him. It was going to be okay. It had to be. Then his heart sank. Rand was off to the side, a pair of men, warders perhaps, holding his arms. They were all caught. The only person he recognized that wasn't on their knees was Beni Sedai, and she seemed to be with the other Aes Sedai. Had she betrayed them? A haughty, dark-haired woman in a red dress looked them over, contempt in her eyes. We will have to deal with the men. After that, unpleasantness, we do not have enough of us to safely hold them all the way back to Tar Valon. Indeed, the second Aes Sedai looked straight at him. One of them killed Galena. I shall enjoy this more than I perhaps should. Deal with the men. What did they mean? Were they going to just kill him? No, not now, not like this. Suddenly he desperately wished he'd never gone to the hall, never lied about his age. A voice broke out above the murmur of the Aes Sedai. Katarine, this is madness. Was that Beni Sedai? She sounded angrier than he had ever heard her before. It is a crime against Tower law and an unjustified cruelty. The taint is gone. One of the Aes Sedai, a dark-haired woman in a red dress, answered, Be silent, Beni, or I will make you be silent. Your association with these people has already placed you in enough difficulty. I would advise you to stop digging. Please, Katarine, believe me, if you do this it will be your own end. The Hall will take its revenge. The last battle is coming. We need every channeler we can, however distasteful they may be. Be silent, or I shall have you shielded and gagged. The threat seemed to be enough to cow Beni, but then another Aes Sedai spoke up. She is right. Much as I dislike delaying the rightful punishment for such men, I cannot be a party to the breaking of Tower law. There was a pause. Very well, if you do not have the stomach to do what needs to be done, you are excused. The Aes Sedai shot Katarine a look, and then stalked out of the room, not even sparing a glance for Eben and his comrades. These women were insane. Never mind the taint on Sedin. They had utterly taken leave of their senses. Taija was going to kill them all when she found out, and Beni was not sure she would be inclined to try to restrain her, even if she could. Surely they did not think they could get away with this, but of course they did. They had not had the education that was provided by spending time at the hall or seeing the beating that Taija had so casually inflicted on one of the most powerful false dragons in history. The question was, should she do anything? No, that was not the question. Of course she should. These were not her novices, but they were still innocents. Amusing, perhaps Taija was rubbing off on her after all. Regardless, Taija would find out eventually, and Beni's fellow Aes Sedai here would become dead women walking. Helping that along would not make any difference to them, but it might get young Rand and the rest out of their clutches sooner. The real question was how Beni wove carefully, inverting her razor-sharp web of spirit, air, and fire. She could not do this at any speed. She had neither the strength nor the dexterity, but she would have one shot. One invisible shot. She met the eyes of the young man closest to her, a choice made by what she could see, but not a terrible choice at that. When he looked back at her, she very deliberately looked behind him to the door. His face was impassive. She could only hope he had understood. A second later she struck, slicing through the weave shielding Yer. There was an endless moment of nothing, and then he was moving, turning and sprinting for the door. A warder was flung away from him. Another leapt into his path, only to be bowled over by the huge man. Before he could reach the door, a shield was thrust into place on him, cutting him off from the power once more. But then it was too late. He sprinted out of sight before he could be bound in air. Katarine was clearly absolutely furious, on the verge of exploding with rage, even if she kept her voice to an icy, cold calm. What in the light just happened there? She rounded on the sister who had been leading the link, holding Yer's shield. We will be having words after this, but now, just go. Take 10 sisters and their warders and kill the Wilder. I do not wish to see him again. Yer felt the shield he had been probing at vanish. Something had happened. He did not know what, but it did not matter. He need to move. He had tow, more tow than he could think about for freezing during the battle with the Aes Sedai. How could he have done anything else? To strike at Aes Sedai would have been a betrayal of himself as an Ale, but by not doing anything he had betrayed his comrades. Betrayed the Karakan and the Hall. Before anyone could react, he was moving, seizing Sedin. One of the Aes Sedai's warders placed himself in his path, moving to grapple. Normally, he would have welcomed the dance, but not now, not like this. He needed to escape. They depended on him. He spun air and sent the man tumbling. Another warder leapt in front of him, and he just ran through the smaller man. He needed to be gone. If he was to regain any honor, then first he would need to escape. Then he could warn Taija and tell Sedai of what had happened. He felt a shield cut off his connection to Sedin, but he was already out of the chamber, turning down a corridor at a full sprint, ignoring the commotion behind him. If he could stay out of sight for long enough, he could break the shield. Then they would dance. But no, his duty now was to survive, not to kill them. However much the honorless dogs deserved it. If he was caught these datsing masquerading as Aes Sedai might be able to escape. A pair of palace guards saw him coming and raised their halberds in a panic. Slow, they were so slow. Yer dived under the first thrust, coming up inside the man's guard and snatching the knife from his belt before burying it in the other guard's neck. Before the first could recover, he'd headbutted and stuck him directly in the throat, leaving him to collapse to the floor, choking on his own broken trachea. Yer picked up a halberd, hefting it in his hand. Too heavy and too long, but better than nothing. Then he pulled the knife out of the guard's throat, wiped it on the man's tunic, and he was running again. Now he was armed. He would be no easy prey. If he wanted to escape, he would need to either hide or get out of the palace. As he ran, he pushed against the shield, feeling it flex as he gained distance. Rand watched with growing horror as the Aes Sedai looked down on the kneeling students. His arms were held securely by a pair of warders, while far too many Aes Sedai held a shield on him. Nevertheless, he pressed against it again, searching for any weakness. You have been forsaken by the light. You have chosen to channel the one power, to channel Sedin, and the Creator has turned his eyes from you. The Aes Sedai seemed to be pronouncing sentence. He had stopped this. Please stop. We can discuss this. There's room to talk. You don't need to do this. The taint is gone. Sedin is clean. The Aes Sedai glanced over at him. If he will not be quiet, then gag him. She turned back to the kneeling men. The only sentence for channeling as a man is to be gentled, to protect the world from you, to protect you from yourselves. May the Creator have mercy on your souls. Despite the solemnity of the words, she sounded pleased as she said them. Rand's voice rose to a scream. Don't do this. You'll regret it. I'll make you regret it. Eben saw Noryuan jerk beside him and then flop to the floor, sobbing, as the warders holding him let go. He couldn't help but watch, however much it horrified him, yet his eyes were dragged inexorably back to the Aes Sedai who stood smugly over them. Rand screamed something and then there was a commotion, but he only had eyes for the Aes Sedai. He wouldn't beg or cry. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. He was too young for this, too young to end things like this. Suddenly there was tearing sensation deep inside him. It only lasted a moment, and then it was gone. His arms were released and he fell forward onto his hands, panting. He felt so empty, like someone had torn a hole in his soul. Almost instinctively he reached for Sedin, but there was nothing there, just a yawning, empty void. A void he knew could never be filled again. Slowly he forced himself to look up again, defiantly. He wouldn't let them think they'd won, even if they had. The tears wanted to come, but he wouldn't let them. Not yet. Katarine felt her weave slice through the boy's connection to Sedin, ending it forever. It was more than satisfying, removing the filth of a male channeler from the world, especially after one of them had killed Galena. However, her enjoyment of the moment was broken by the commotion from the direction of Ulthor. She looked over, ready to chastise the other sister's useless warders for their failure to shut him up. A warder reached out to gag him with some cloth, and suddenly Ulthor moved. Like a snake, his head whipped round, and his teeth descended on the warder's hand. Almost simultaneously, he pulled one of his arms free. How was he so strong? Lightning fast, he struck the other warder, holding him, pulling his other arm free. Katarine started to weave air. Ulthor drew the first warder's sword, slashing through the other's chest, and then catching him on the backstroke. His eyes met hers, and suddenly the sword was flying through the air straight towards her. Air solidified around the sword only a couple of paces from her and around Ulthor too. She hadn't even had time to panic. That had been far too close. Well, heal the warders, you fools. Yer flexed against the shield again. This time it bent and bent until without any warning it broke, and he could seize Sedin once more, dominating it with easy practice. Now he would show these animals. He had sworn himself to be a spear in Sightblinder's heart. He was not yet strong enough for that, but he would not allow them to take away Sightblinder's greatest enemy. Speaking of spears, he paused and channeled razor-sharp air and fire. A moment later, the unwieldy halberd was transformed into something close to the short spears that he was used to. He rounded a corner and was suddenly in the middle of a squad of Kerhienin soldiers. There was no honor to be had in the dance here. He lashed out with his spear through one's stomach, danced back and slammed the haft into another's jaw. Now they were wary. Desperation was hammering at him. He could not delay, or his comrades, his friends, would die. He channeled fire, and one of the soldiers erupted into flame. At the same time he leapt forward, sliding past a thrusting halberd to stab one and trip the other before whirling and finishing him off. Then he was running again. He needed to get out. His muscles were burning. Even the greatest of warriors could not exert themselves in this way indefinitely. He ignored them nevertheless. Yer was not sure how long he ran through the palace. He had fought and killed several more soldiers, evaded Aes Sedai, but finally he found a window that looked out over what could only be its walls. A web of air blasted in front of him, shattering the window, and a moment later he was through, landing outside in a roll that kept his momentum. He seemed to be in some kind of wetland or garden. Neatly trimmed plants surrounding him. It did not matter. He ignored the alien environment. He needed to get out into the wider city, to survive and bring aid. A woman with an ageless face stepped out in front of him, and suddenly he was tumbling as something caught at his feet. With cat-like grace he caught himself, turning the uncontrolled fall into a roll, and lashed out with Sedin, fire and air splitting his flows two ways. The Aes Sedai, undeserving of the title as she was, sliced his flows and lashed out with her own, a shield hammering at his connection to Sedin. He could already tell she was stronger than him, but not strong enough to shield him while he held the power. He could not stay and fight. He did not have time to think about the toll he had incurred with his inaction before. To incur more by failing now would be unbearable. If he fought, more would come, enough to bring him down. He would not accept that fate. The pattern had spared him once from the fate faced by men who channeled the power. He would not require it to save him again. He fled. Fire flashed past him as he turned to run, jinking left and right, ignoring the burning in his lungs, the way his legs felt like lead weights. The wall was ahead if all was well. The city lay on the other side. More guards were pouring in. He could not allow himself to be drawn in by them. They would have to be evaded. He did not have Taija's strength to fight off many men quickly enough. He allowed himself a small smile at that memory. He was reasonably sure he had worked out what she had done. Truly, she was cunning, but there was no way he could replicate it. It had, however, given him some ideas. It was impossible to lift yourself with the power, but perhaps. A tall hedge rose in front of him, above head height, trapping him. He spun air as fast as he could and sprung onto a platform of it mid-run. Then onto another, and vaulted over the hedge. Ere to the side at an angle, he landed on it, slowing his fall and pushed off sideways, sending him past an alert pair of guards, and he was on the ground running again. The wall was ahead of him. Close but smooth stone, not quick to climb. Behind him the hedge exploded, and he sent a crude web of fire behind him to cover and obscure. A guard came running, and Yer flung his improvised spear through the man's chest. Then he was up, climbing fast. Small webs of air acted as handholds, allowing him to scramble up the wall almost as fast as if it was flat ground. He was glad of his training as a warrior. If he had been a soft wetlander, he would already be caught, already be waking from the dream. Vaulting down, he used more webs of air to push off and slow himself down. Then he was on the ground and running. His body screamed at him to stop and rest. He would not listen. He could rest when he woke from the dream. Until then he would survive, and he would bring warning. Catherine looked at the two men on the ground with a smile, her brush with death already almost forgotten. It was only a pity that the little Thor boy would not be joining them. He needed to survive. That much had been made clear to her. Sadly, one day he would pay for the sisters he had killed. Leave the men. The Kerhienin can deal with that filth as they see fit. Take the girls. They have associated themselves with false Aes Sedai. Their ultimate fate can be determined in Tar Valon. They are young. If they are lucky, they may be permitted to enter themselves into the novice book after their punishment is done. Otherwise, they would be turned out once they had been thoroughly forced to repent for their crimes. They would not enjoy the journey back to Tar Valon either. The tower's justice was harsh, but that was the way of the world. Her mind went back to Ulthor. The man was dangerous. That much was clear. She would need to consider the best way to safely contain him. It was fortunate that she had been taught these new anti-traveling wards before they had left. There would be no repeat of Siu and Sanch's escape. Without those, she suspected he would have made his escape. As it was, they would keep them safe from any retaliation from this hall. If they even had more Aes Sedai, who could travel, they would first have to find her party and then reach them over open ground. Repeatedly reweaving the wards would be an effort, but there were plenty of sisters with her, especially without the need to hold an additional 2 men. A circle of 13 could cover a large area. No doubt, the sisters would be returning to inform her of the red-haired one's death shortly. As Katarine barked out orders, Benny slowly sidled over to one of the Kerhianin nobles, one with a lot of slashes of color across his coat. I see that Katarine is leaving the men in your care. They have turned from the light and stood against the white tower. They deserve their fate and more. They will be hanged tomorrow. Of course he would say that here and now. Of course, I understand. However, I have a thought for a wise man like you. The Hall of Servants will retaliate for this. Your loyalty to the White Tower and its victory would surely receive commendation, from Katarine perhaps, but have you thought about what comes after? The Hall will be looking for revenge, and though the White Tower certainly outnumbers them greatly, I doubt it will protect Kerhian from their anger in the short term. Your destruction is in no one's interest. I certainly see no advantage for the Aes Sedai in it. She belied her words by smiling reassuringly. I do not know what will happen, but if I were being left alone by the Aes Sedai, I might wish to be able to say to any angry people looking for revenge that I only did what the Aes Sedai made me do, and that I had done my best to look after their victims. Such a thing would have little cost. Katarine will not care what you do with them, but it might bring great benefits for a suitably wise man.